Chapter 45-27. Those ferocious beasts specifically pounced on her. When her clothes were torn off, those ferocious beasts pounced on her clothes. Seeing that scene, if she didn't react, then she would really be a fool. But, just a 4-year-old child, could it be that she really dared to have such thoughts? "Why are you scolding my sister?" How, coldly shouted back, his cold little face sunk. The 3 young men and women who were helping her apply medicine and put on her clothes were slightly startled when they saw this. They looked at the children and were about to speak when they heard her murderous voice. "Cousin, kill that little girl for me. Kill her." The woman hatefully said, her gaze fixed on the innocent face of Yu. Yu blinked her eyes innocently and looked at the woman with a bit of grievance in her soft voice. "Big sister, why are you scolding me?" "Why? I'm like this, isn't it because of you?" The woman gasped for breath. In her agitation, the wounds on her body seeped out again. Those mercenaries looked at them and couldn't help but frown. The mercenary leader looked at both sides and asked in a deep voice, "What's going on?" Then, his gaze fell on Yu. "Little girl, you tell us." Hao and Mu Chen listened but didn't have the intention to stop Yu from speaking. They just quietly stood by her side. Yu played with her fingers, and with her pair of beautiful big eyes, she glanced at that woman whose body was full of injuries, and her soft voice carried a bit of innocence and naivety. "That big sister took me to relieve myself, then sprinkled something on my body, so I learned from her, and also sprinkled something on her body." Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but be startled. They looked at her with a complicated gaze and frowned again. Looking at the injured woman, they asked, "Is what she said true? What kind of powder did you sprinkle on this little girl? She's talking nonsense." There was a moment of panic in the woman's eyes, followed by anger. "If I really sprinkled something on her, would she be standing there well? The one being attacked by the ferocious beasts now is me, not her. That's because I noticed the smell of beast powder on my sister's body, so I asked her to change her clothes." Hao said coldly. He stared at the woman and said, "There's a saying that goes, if you hurt someone, you hurt yourself. Who do you want to blame? What a vicious child." The young man who hadn't spoken until now shouted coldly, and his gaze carried a wisp of killing intent as he stared at Hao and the others. "We didn't make a fuss about the mercenaries bringing all of you along, but all of you intended to kill my cousin. Vicious children like you will only be a scourge if you live." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure suddenly flashed forward, and a cold light flashed past. Piercingly cold sword chi carried a murderous aura as it suddenly attacked towards Hao and the others. "Be careful!" Deputy Commander Zheng shouted in a low voice. He shot forward like an arrow and arrived in front of Hao and the others, blocking the attack for them. Bang! That sword chi landed on Deputy Commander Zheng's sword, and the air current and the blade collided, making a muffled sound. No one saw that Hao who was standing in front of Mu Chen and Mu Yu, moved his hand slightly at that moment. If it wasn't for Deputy Commander Zheng standing in front of them, he would have taken action himself. Chapter 45-28. If Miss Lin didn't have bad intentions towards that little girl first, how could she have ended up in this state? Deputy Commander Zheng calmly glanced at the pale-faced girl and said, "Miss Lin, that little girl is only 3 or 4 years old. How could she know about drugging? If you didn't drug her first, she wouldn't have learned from you. Speaking of which, the root of the problem is still you." Finished speaking, he turned around and looked towards Yu, who had an innocent face. With a stern face, he somewhat helplessly said, "Little girl, you are still young. You should learn some good things and not learn bad things. Just like today's matter, you also did wrong. If you knew that she had drugged you, you should have come and told me." "Oh, you knows." She nodded with an innocent and harmless appearance. At this time, the commander looked at both sides and said in a deep voice, "We are still in the forest. I hope that this kind of thing won't happen again in the next few days. After saying this, he said to the man surnamed Liang, young Master Liang, help Miss Lin treat and bandage her wounds first. He then asked a few mercenaries to take out a stretcher. After they bandaged the wounds, he asked them to carry the girl away. The group in front walked quickly. At the back, Deputy Commander Zheng slowed down and walked beside Hao, and the others. He said, "What you did was really unwise. They are the children of aristocratic families and have a big family behind them. If you become enemies with them here, it's hard to guarantee that they won't make things difficult for you outside." Hao didn't reply. Instead, his eyes flashed and he asked, "Deputy Commander Zheng, why are most of the mercenaries in the Foundation establishment realm?" Deputy Commander Zheng didn't expect him to ask this question. After being startled for a moment, he smiled and said, "Otherwise, do you think that everyone can be like me and the commander, with a golden core realm cultivation?" As he spoke, he let out a low chuckle. His voice carried a hint of carefreeness as he said, "Do you know why our mercenary group is one of the best in the mercenary association even though we don't have the most members?" Hao shook his head and didn't say anything. "That's because the commander and I are both golden core realm cultivators. For other mercenary groups, having one golden core realm cultivator is already very strong." He laughed out loud, and his tone was filled with pride. "It's precisely because we have 2 golden core cultivators in our mercenary team that no one dares to provoke us. The completion rate of our missions is also extremely high." Hao's heart slightly moved. He asked, "Golden core realm cultivators are very strong. Isn't there someone stronger?" You are still young. You don't know how many years it takes to cultivate to the golden core stage. Even the leader and I cultivated for nearly 100 years before we reached the golden core stage. As for those above the golden core stage, there are naturally those, but only the ancestors of some big aristocratic families or sects will appear. Ordinary people will at most reach the golden core stage in their lifetime. It is very difficult for them to break through." He sighed softly. As he walked, he looked at the sky and said, "I once heard that in the other heaven realms, there are many experts above the gold core realm. Some of them are even existences that we don't even dare to think about." Chapter 45-29. Thinking of his own strength and the snow wolf by his side, his heart calmed down a little. At least, even if they really encounter danger, he would be able to protect his younger siblings. "Then can't we go to the other regions of the heaven realm?" he asked again. "How can it be so easy? However, I heard that there will be people from the upper realm coming down to the floating margin sect every 3 years to select good seedlings and bring them to the sect. However, there are very few who can be selected." Hearing this, Hao's eyes lit up and he glanced at his younger siblings. If that was the case, then the people in the floating margin sect must know how to go to the upper realm or contact people from the upper realm. Along the way, they chatted as they walked, and Hao, intentionally or unintentionally inquired about information. When Deputy Commander Zheng heard his question, he felt a little strange in his heart, but he didn't think too much about it. After all, this was information that could be casually obtained outside and wasn't considered a secret. However, he was a little curious. Why was this child so interested in these things? When night fell, the group stopped to rest. Those few young men and women stared at Hao, and the others from time to time, but they didn't play any tricks. Instead, some mercenaries surrounded Yu, and Mu Yu and played with them. "Hey, little girl, you're called Yu, A mercenary grinned and looked at Yu, who was holding a piece of meat in her hand and biting it. Yu glanced at him and nodded with a smile. "Yes, I'm called Yu, Uncle can also call me Yu, Yu, why are you here? Where is your home? Do you know what your father's name is?" Another mercenary asked. Yu bit the meat, and as if a small squirrel chewing, her pair of beautiful eyes blinked while looking at them. After she swallowed the meat in her mouth, she softly said, "Big brother said, when eating, don't talk to other people." After speaking, she continued to hold the meat wrapped in leaves and continued to chew. When the surrounding mercenaries heard this, they were stunned for a moment. Then, they laughed and didn't ask any more questions. However, pairs of eyes were still looking at the three children. She didn't know when she hadn't interacted with them before, but after interacting with them for a day, she realized that these three children seemed to have become spirits. Even if she wanted to get anything out of them, it seemed that she couldn't get anything out of them. The next few days were peaceful until one day, under the guidance of the mercenaries, the group finally left the forest and saw the flat road outside. "He's out." Deputy Commander Zheng smiled and looked at Hao, and the others, asking, "What do you plan to do next? Are you coming with us to the city or going home?" Hao thought about it and said, "We'll follow you all into the city." "All right, we'll take you with us on our swords. We'll arrive around noon," Vice Regiment Commander Zheng said with a smile. After exchanging a few words with the regiment commander, the entire group flew on their swords and headed towards the city. Around noon, they arrived at the city gate. They put away their flying swords and landed on the ground. The young men and women said their goodbyes and left quickly after taking a deep look at the children. Chapter 45-30. Hao nodded. "I know. Then I'll leave first." He glanced at the children and told them to be careful. Then, he sighed and left. "Young Master Hao, are we going into the city? Or should we find another place to stay?" 17 asked. Hao looked at the city gate in front of them and said, "I've seen it all along the way. Other than this town, there are no other towns. There are only one or two small villages. Even if we want to leave for another town, we have to pass through here." He paused and thought for a moment before saying, 17, "Find a quiet courtyard after we enter the city. We won't stay in an inn. We'll rent a courtyard." "Yes." 17 responded and followed the three of them into the city. After sending them to a restaurant to eat, she quickly went to make arrangements. On the other side, in the Lin family's hall in the city, the girl surnamed Lin threw herself into her mother's arms and cried. She roughly told her parents what had happened. "Your injuries were actually caused by a child." Patriarch Lin frowned with a gloomy face. "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? A 4-year-old child plotted against you?" The girl sobbed softly and said, "I didn't expect that little girl to be so vicious. She actually poured medicine on me. If those mercenaries hadn't saved me in time, I'm afraid I would have died under the claws of those ferocious beasts. Damn it!" Patriarch Lin shouted angrily and slammed his hand on the table. "Where did these wild children come from? How dare they bully our Lin family?" He scolded angrily and asked in a deep voice with a frown, "Where are they now? Are they also in the city? They followed us back. They should have also entered the city." The girl sobbed softly and said, "Father, you must capture those children. I want to teach them a lesson and vent my anger." After hearing his daughter's words, Master Lin asked the other 3 people who were with her. Although there were some discrepancies between what his daughter had said and what she had said, it was a fact that his daughter had suffered a loss at the hands of those children. Thus, he immediately sent people to the city to look for those children. If they saw those children, they were to capture them and bring them back. On the other side, Hao, and the others were eating in a restaurant. They bought some pastries and stored them in the space to bring them back. They borrowed the restaurant owner's backyard and took a hot bath. After changing their clothes, they sat in the front and waited for 17 to come back. Even in a restaurant, the 3 of them were exceptionally eye-catching. However, many people saw that the 3 children had extraordinary temperaments and thought that they should be the children of aristocratic families. They only looked at them for a while before withdrawing their gazes. "Big brother, 17 has returned." Seeing 17 walking towards them on the street, Yu happily smiled. Hao and Mu Chen looked down and knew that he had found the courtyard. Not long after, 17 came up, bowed to them, and said, "Young Master Hao, the arrangements have been made." Hao nodded. After paying the bill, he left with his sister-in-law and followed 17. Those children are really outstanding. One look and you can tell that they must be the children of aristocratic families. But the strength of that guard doesn't seem to be much. He doesn't look like a guard of an aristocratic family. Chapter 45-31. The sounds of discussion in the restaurant came to a halt as everyone sized up the two men, but no one spoke. Seeing this, the two guards took out a piece of silver and threw it to the waiter, asking, "What do the children look like? Where did they go?" The waiter took the silver and grinned, saying, "It's a pair of identical twins, about 3 or 4 years old. They also have an older brother, about 10 years old. There's also a guard in black, but he has already left, heading in that direction. As for where exactly he went, this little one doesn't know." Seeing this, the two guards looked at each other and turned to look in the direction the waiter pointed. Seeing that they had left, the guests in the restaurant glanced at the waiter and said, "We don't know who they are," but they casually revealed the whereabouts of the children. If those two guards went to find trouble with the children, you have sinned. What can happen? Those children don't look like ordinary people. Besides, those two guards just now had the Lin family's waist tag on their waists. One look and you can tell that they are the Lin family's guards. What can they do to the children? The waiter said disapprovingly. Seeing this, the people in the restaurant did not say anything more. The Lin family was a big family in this city. They should not find trouble with the children. On the other side, 17 led Hao and the others to the courtyard they had just rented. Once inside, 17 said to them, "I found someone to ask about renting a house. The landlord recommended a few courtyards. I went to take a look and finally chose this one." 17 looked at the courtyard and said, "The city lord's mansion is just one street to the east of this courtyard, so no one dares to cause trouble in this area. The environment is also relatively good. Although the courtyard is not big and the rent is more expensive than the others, in the end, I feel that this courtyard is more suitable for us. Yes, it's very good here." Hao nodded and looked at Mu Chen and Mu Yu, saying, "We will settle down here first and find out some information about this area. After we are familiar with it, we will make plans. During this time, the two of you should not run out, in case you meet with danger, understand?" "Yes, big brother, don't worry, we know," the two little guys said obediently. "Let's rest for today. From tomorrow onwards, 17, you go out and gather information. Also." Hao's voice paused. He glanced at the courtyard and said, "Set up a formation later. The three of you should familiarize yourselves with it so that you don't get lost in the formation." "Okay." The three of them answered and walked inside to familiarize themselves with the structure of the courtyard. The guards of the Lin family split up to find out. It was not until night fell that they found out that the children had rented a courtyard and had already moved in. Thus, they returned to the mansion to report. In the Lin family patriarch's face darkened when he heard the guard's report. He looked at the guard below unhappily and said, "Didn't I tell you to capture him directly? Don't tell me you can't go in after renting the courtyard." Hearing this, the guard hurriedly replied, "Yes, your subordinate will go and capture him now." After saying that, he quickly retreated. Chapter 45-32. 17, Go and rest. Hao stood in the yard and said to 17, who was standing guard, "Young Master Hao, I'll keep watch. You go and sleep first." 17 said but did not leave. Hao shook his head and said, "It's useless for you to keep watch here. You're too weak. Even if someone comes, you won't be able to defeat them. Why don't you go and rest first and recover your energy to do other things?" Hearing this, 17 pursed her lips and finally replied, yes. She took 2 steps and stopped to ask, young master, how, will someone really sneak in tonight? Would those youngsters really not let go of this matter? It doesn't matter if there is or not. How, said, go. You don't have to worry here. Seeing this, 17 walked towards his room. There were only 2 courtyards in the front yard and the backyard. The front yard was the living room and there were 3 rooms in the backyard. Mu Chen and Mu Yu were still young and were used to sleeping in one room. Hao had one room for himself and the other room was given to 17. Hao sat cross-legged in front of Mu Chen and Mu Yu's room and closed his eyes to cultivate. At the same time, he released his divine sense to cover the whole yard. As the night deepened, the 4 guards quietly came to the door of the small yard. Looking at the tightly shut door, they looked at each other and jumped up to go into the yard. The yard was quiet and there was no sound at all. It was pitch black all around. They walked along the path of the front yard and prepared to go to the backyard. Unexpectedly, they circled around the front yard for a long time and still could not get out of the front yard. What's going on? Why do we keep circling around here? One of the guards was a little frightened and asked in a low voice. Oh no, I'm afraid there's a formation here. Another guard said. Didn't they say there were only 3 children and a guard who had just drawn chi into his body not long ago? How did they know how to set up a formation? Another person asked in astonishment. We can't get out of this formation. Let's retreat first and go back to report to the master. Thus, they circled around a few times before retreating back to the Lin family to report. What? There's a formation in that yard? Are you sure? When Patriarch Lin heard their report, his brows immediately furrowed. He walked in the hall with his hands behind his back. He looked at his daughter and asked, didn't you say that there were only 3 children and a guard with mediocre strength? How do they know how to set up arrays? This daughter doesn't know. They've been following the mercenaries all this time, and they haven't shown anything. The woman hurriedly said. Patriarch, I'll go take a look. A man in his 30s walked out with a confident look on his face. He said, I know a little about formations. Breaking a maze formation won't be a problem. Go. I don't care what method you use, but you must capture those brats for me. Patriarch Lin ordered in a deep voice. Thus, a few guards, along with a man in his 30s, went to the small courtyard again. Hao, who was sitting cross-legged in front of the door, had already noticed when those people stepped into the courtyard for the second time. He slowly opened his eyes, and a murderous look appeared in his cold gaze. He stood up and quietly walked to the front yard. Chapter 45-33. Therefore, he did not directly kill them. Instead, he released the aura of his golden elixir cultivation and enveloped them. Puff. Ah. Puff. Puff. Almost at the same time the pressure was released, the people in the array spat out mouthfuls of blood and fell to their knees. Who is it? The man in his 30s asked in shock. His eyes were full of fear. Get lost. A cold voice rang out in the air and struck the people's minds. They hugged their heads and cried out in pain. At the same time, they were sent flying by a gust of wind and were swept out of the courtyard. Hiss. Ah. The sound of gasping was accompanied by screams. The people looked at the small courtyard in shock. Their faces were pale and they quickly scrambled away. Hao pursed his lips and stood in the courtyard. He looked at the night sky and finally turned back to rest. He showed his strength to let them think that even though they were just a few children, there was a strong person protecting them in the dark. They would not dare to have any ideas about them. This way, they would be able to prevent future trouble. If the Lin family knew what was good for them, they would not dare to come again after this incident. At this moment, in the Lin family, Patriarch Lin silently looked at the few people in the hall. After listening to their words, his face became dignified. It seems that there is a strong person protecting those children in the dark. We can't touch them. Father, are we just going to let it go like this? The girl asked unwillingly. What else can we do? He looked at her with a sullen face and a displeased look in his eyes. If not for you, how could we have offended an unknown strong person? With such a strong person protecting them in the dark, how could those children be ordinary children like you said? After scolding his daughter, he looked at the people in the hall and said, tomorrow, prepare a gift and go to the small courtyard to apologize. At the same time, find out more about them. Patriarch, do you still want us to go? The man was a little frightened. Because of what happened tonight, he was terrified and did not dare to go to the small courtyard again. Do you want me to go? He snorted heavily and strode out with his hands behind his back. The next day, 17 went out early in the morning to buy breakfast. When he arrived at the entrance of the courtyard, he saw a few people pacing back and forth in front of the door. Seeing this, he stepped forward and asked, "What are you doing here?" Seeing 17 in black, those people hurriedly retreated. The man in the lead revealed a smile and said, "Little brother, we are from the Lin clan. We are here to apologize. We have offended you before, please forgive us. This is a token of our sincerity, please accept it." 17 didn't take it, and she just glanced at them and said, "We don't know the Lin clan, and we don't know all of you as well. Don't wander around here." As he spoke, he walked past them and entered the courtyard, closing the door behind him. The people outside the door looked at each other. One of them asked, "What do we do now? What can we do?" "Of course we're going back. Don't tell me you dare to barge in," the man said angrily. After stuffing the things he was carrying into the hands of the guard, he turned around and left in large strides. At around 7 in the morning, the children got out of bed. After washing up, they sat in the courtyard and prepared to eat breakfast. 17 then told them about what happened in the morning. "I just went to take a look. They have already left." Chapter 45-34. Thus, after eating breakfast, 17 also went out to inquire for information. As for how, after instructing the two little ones to cultivate by themselves, he prepared to return to his room to cultivate. However, just when he was about to return to his room, his sleeve was pulled by Big brother. Raised her delicate little face and looked at him. "What's the matter, How? Asked and turned around. "Is there something you don't understand about cultivation? Where do you not understand? Big brother will tell you." Shook her head and looked at him. "No, big brother, wants to learn herbs. After she tried to use medicine to deal with people, she wanted to learn about herbs. Perhaps she could also be like her mother and be able to make those powerful medicine and pills." How was startled and somewhat disagreed. "You are still too young now. It will be very difficult for you to understand the knowledge of herbs. Moreover, you have to try it out on the side to familiarize yourself quickly. You should learn swordsmanship first." But wants to learn herbs," she whispered and pulled his sleeve. "Big brother, you will also work hard to learn swordsmanship. But, can you spare some time to learn herbs every day?" Mu Chen saw this and also opened his mouth. "Big brother, if wants to learn, then let her learn. She will learn the things she is interested in very quickly." Seeing this, How thought of their mother and looked at again. Finally, he nodded. "All right. However, you can't fall behind in your cultivation. Those are the skills you can use to protect yourself. As for medicine, when you see father and mother in the future, let mother teach you. Only then will you understand how to use those things." Happily nodded and asked with a smile, "Big brother, then should we go out to buy books on herbs?" Hao smiled and said, "No need, I have a book here that mother showed me." He took out a thick book from the space and handed it to her. He didn't forget to remind her. This is mother's book. You have to take care of it carefully. Don't spoil or dirty it. You will definitely take good care of mother's book." She nodded, her little face full of seriousness and solemnity. Her little hands tightly hugged the thick book to her chest. This was her mother's book. "Mother, when will I be able to see mother?" In another world, Fengjiu seemed to feel something. He held Xianyuan Mo's hand and smiled. "I think the children must be missing me." Xianyuan Mo was slightly startled. He glanced at her and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. "Those three little guys, there's no one around to take care of them. I don't know how mischievous they will be." Hao and Chen have always been obedient and self-disciplined. But that girl, I'm really worried that she will cause trouble everywhere. Fengjiu helplessly shook his head and sighed. "I really want to find them sooner." "I will." Xianyuan Mo tightly held her hand and said. Suddenly, his slow pace stopped. His expression slightly changed, especially after he felt the surging spiritual energy in his body. Fengjiu, who was beside him, felt the change of spiritual energy in his body. After being startled, she said with some surprise, "You shouldn't be advancing, right?" "I think so." Xianyuan Mo said while suppressing the surging spiritual energy in his body. "This world can't bear my advancement." Chapter 45-35. During this period of time, due to the disappearance of the three children, Fengjiu had been uneasy and could not calm down to refine elixirs. Even when he said that he would find time to refine elixirs in case of an emergency, he did not stop to refine elixirs. This time, Xianyuan Mo's advancement came so suddenly that the two of them were caught off guard. With his strength, the mortal realm would not be able to withstand his breakthrough. Therefore, the two of them could only quickly fly through the void and return to the floating island in the heaven realm, where their mental energy covered the entire area. This place floated in the sky and was surrounded by a defensive boundary. It was also the place where the people that Fengjiu had subdued lived. It was the safest place to advance. At this time, Xianyuan Mo was sitting cross-legged on the peak of a mountain on the floating island that reached into the clouds. His body was surrounded by a powerful and intimidating spiritual aura and ancient pressure. No one on the floating island dared to come close to him within 100 miles. Fengjiu stood 100 meters away and watched. His brows were slightly furrowed and his eyes were filled with worry. He was extremely anxious. The strength of a supreme being was the highest level that she knew of. It was a rare existence among immortal cultivators in the world. However, when one advanced to such a level, there was a high chance of death and it was extremely dangerous. They originally thought that the strength of a supreme being would not be so easy to reach, but they did not expect that it would come so suddenly when they were not prepared. At that critical moment, she only had time to give him all the elixirs that could be of use. However, she was still worried that those elixirs would not be able to withstand his advancement this time. Xianyuan Mo felt the spiritual aura in his body surging violently. He could no longer suppress it and choose another time to advance. Therefore, while guiding the spiritual aura in his body, he opened his eyes and looked at Fengjiu, who was 100 meters away. "Aju, don't worry. There have been no accidents in the past. This time, there won't be any accidents." Xianyuan Mo comforted her. He looked at her and said, "I don't think my advancement will be over in a short period of time. You don't have to stay here. No one can help me at this stage. Go do your thing." "What are you talking about?" Fengjiu snapped, "Just focus on breaking through, don't think about anything else. I'll stay here and watch you break through until I see you succeed." Hearing this, Xianyuan Mo's lips moved slightly. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He only curled his lips slightly, revealing a faint smile. All right. He slowly closed his eyes and discarded the distracting thoughts in his mind, focusing on advancing. Boom! Crack! In the sky, rumbling sounds like muffled thunder resounded in the clouds. Streaks of lightning streaked across the sky, and a loud crack sounded. It was as if it directly struck people's hearts, causing their hearts to fiercely jump, and they faintly felt somewhat uneasy. Boom! Crack! The sound of thunder and lightning resounded above their heads. The sound shook the entire sky. The loud sound of thunder and lightning even reached the clouds and reverberated in the depths of the sky for a long time. Chapter 45-36. Fengjiu narrowed her eyes and looked at the sky above Xianyuan Mo's, who was sitting cross-legged. Over there, a whole patch of dark clouds was gathering. From the size of the top of his head, it gradually spread outwards, turning the sky into a dense patch of dark clouds. The sun's rays were blocked. The sky, which was originally shining brightly, turned into dusk in the blink of an eye. The entire world was enveloped by this dusk, and the atmosphere was so oppressive that it made it hard for people to breathe. Fengjiu's hands trembled slightly. Her body was a little tense, and her heart was in her throat. To reach the peak of the godly king realm, she had experienced countless breakthroughs in heavenly lightning tempering. However, she had never seen anything like this. Whether it was the change in the sky or the unprecedented spiritual energy on Mo's body, they all made her feel a sense of unease and fear that she had never felt before. For those who had reached the strength stage like them, there were many times when they would have a faint premonition in their hearts the moment something bad happened. And at this moment, it was exactly like that. She took a deep breath and suppressed her uneasy emotions. She clenched her trembling hands and looked at the figure sitting cross-legged with closed eyes. She had gone through so many breakthroughs in the past without any accidents. This time, it shouldn't be the same. Perhaps, she was only feeling uneasy because her children were not by her side and she had not been able to prepare the pills needed for her breakthroughs in advance. What she did not know was that when Xianyuan Mo's released his aura and spiritual energy, and when the muffled sound of thunder and lightning rang out in the sky, Tian Jizi, who was far away in another world, opened his eyes almost instantly and looked towards the sky. Sitting cross-legged on the peak of Heaven Mountain, he looked at the gradually darkening sky. His brows were slightly furrowed, and he reached out his hand to make a divination. However, after a long time, he was unable to divine the heavenly secrets that he wanted to know. His slightly furrowed brows were also unable to loosen for a long time. The other sovereigns of the heaven realm only heard the sound of thunder. Some of them didn't even know what was going on. Some of them were puzzled and looked towards the direction of the celestial phenomenon. Fengjiu thought that Xianyuan Mo's first bolt of lightning would strike quickly, but he didn't expect that after he had been sitting cross-legged on the mountain peak for 3 days, the first bolt of lightning would strike from the sky with a boom. The lightning struck precisely where he was sitting cross-legged. However, when the heavenly lightning struck, it was blocked by the defensive airflow formed by the spiritual aura condensed and surging on his body. Most of the power was neutralized, and only a small amount of lightning power struck his body. She involuntarily let out a sigh of relief when she saw this scene. Her anxious heart also relaxed slightly. If this was the case, he should be fine. Even if the advancement this time was extremely difficult, he should be able to endure it. Unexpectedly, just as she heaved a sigh of relief, a soft sigh suddenly entered her ears. Alas! Who is it? She turned her head almost instantly and shouted. Her cold gaze contained pressure as it swept towards the direction of the voice. Wherever her gaze passed, an ancient pressure suddenly appeared. It's me. Chapter 45-37. Senior. Fengjiu was slightly surprised. Her eyes were filled with undisguised surprise and astonishment. As far as she knew, this divine predictor rarely left Sky Mountain. Back then, even when Mo Chen met with an accident and disappeared from the world, he did not appear. So why was he here now? Faintly, she smelled a trace of something unusual. At the same time, her heart, which had just relaxed, was once again raised because of his arrival. The divine predictor slowly came over on his immortal instrument. When his wise and old eyes fell on Xianyuan Mo's, a trace of pity flashed across his eyes. Looking at the dusky sky without any sunlight, he sighed softly in his heart. "Senior, why are you here? Is something the matter?" Fengjiu asked. She withdrew her aura and looked at the divine predictor. The divine predictor stood beside her and said, "I'm here to take a look." After saying this, he did not say anything more. Instead, his eyes fell on Xianyuan Mo's, who was 100 meters away. His expression was unreadable, and no one knew what he was thinking. Fengjiu's eyes moved slightly. She looked at him and asked softly, "Senior, will he be able to successfully advance?" The divine predictor did not speak. He just stood there quietly and watched. "I did not prepare any elixirs for him to advance, and I can't imagine what kind of tempering he will have to endure this time," Fengjiu said faintly. Hearing this, the divine predictor sighed and looked at her. "Even if you prepared an elixir, it's useless. Sometimes, it's hard to go against the will of the heavens. Senior, are you saying that he won't be able to pass this stage?" Fengjiu frowned slightly. Her heart sank because of his words. "What his fate will be in the end will naturally be known in 81 days, the divine predictor said slowly. He didn't look at Fengjiu. Instead, he looked ahead and said, "Sometimes, it's not that people don't want to live, it's that the heavens don't want to let them live. Immortal cultivation is something that goes against the heavens. Every breakthrough is equivalent to taking a step into hell. It's even more so for supremes. It's not easy to become a supremes. In the past, it only took 3 bolts of heavenly lightning to break through. Could it be that this time, it will be tempered by 81 bolts of heavenly lightning?" Fengjiu's expression changed slightly as he looked at Xianyuan Mo's, who was 100 meters away. Half of the power of the previous lightning had been blocked, and only one strand had landed on his body. However, it had caused his clothes to be slightly charred. If there were 81 bolts, then, Tian Jizi didn't speak again. He just looked ahead in silence. Fengjiu's face was slightly pale. Looking at the dark sky and the strong air currents and pressure in the air, he only felt an impulse to go forward and stop it. However, at this moment, even if she wanted to stop him, she couldn't stop him from breaking through. Now that he was in the midst of breaking through and enduring the tempering of the heavenly lightning, he only had 2 paths. The first was to successfully break through and pass through this dangerous juncture. The second was to fail, and the consequences of failure. Her body trembled slightly. She couldn't imagine the consequences of failure, and she was even more powerless to bear it. Xianyuan Mo's, who was in the midst of the air currents, didn't know anything else. He was only focused on breaking through, guiding the spiritual aura in his body in the terrifying air currents that were surging. Chapter 45-38. This was because she could not bear the consequences of Moses' failure. If he failed, not only would he lose his cultivation base, but he would also lose his life. Perhaps it was because the strange phenomenon in the sky had yet to dissipate, or perhaps it was because the thunder and lightning were still intertwining. Gradually, other sovereigns arrived outside the floating island by following the strange phenomenon and the reverberating sound and the fluctuating airflow. However, because this floating island was Fengjiu's territory, the entire island was suspended in the sky and was protected by a powerful barrier. Even if the sovereigns wanted to enter, they were blocked outside. One of the sovereigns tried to enter the floating island, but he was blocked by the barrier. The airflow from the barrier pushed him out, preventing him from entering. Seeing this, he rubbed his chin and muttered, "The barrier set up by Fengjiu is indeed extraordinary. Even I cannot enter." Actually, it was not that they could not enter. However, if they tried to force their way in, they would definitely break the barrier. They knew that this was Fengzhou's territory, and they were all sovereigns. Naturally, they could not force their way in and become enemies with Fengzhou. Therefore, they could only be blocked outside. They did not know that the divine predictor from Heaven Mountain, an old man who looked simple and unpretentious but had an ethereal aura, had easily entered this place. Could it be that Fengzhou or Xianyuan Mose is advancing? The sovereigns who had gathered did not leave. Instead, they discussed thoughtfully outside. This is their territory, and they have caused such a huge commotion. It is reasonable to say that they are advancing. However, from what I know, they are both at the peak of the Supreme God stage. If they advance further, they will be at the Supreme God stage. That kind of power is extremely rare. Perhaps it's not them who are advancing. According to what I know, they seem to have been traveling through the mortal world recently. Why would they suddenly return and be in the midst of advancing? Moreover, how long has it been since they became supreme gods? It is impossible for them to advance so quickly. If they weren't advancing, what could have happened? As they spoke, they couldn't help but look at each other. After a long time, one of them said, "Instead of waiting here and not being able to see anything, why don't we go to the Black Tortoise Monarch's place? He has a good relationship with Fengzhou and the others. Perhaps he might know something." "That's a good idea." The others laughed and flew into the sky together. Fengzhou had no idea what was going on outside the floating island, nor did he have the heart to pay attention to it. At this moment, all of her attention and thoughts were focused on Xianyuan Mose, who was advancing. Just as Tian Jizi had said, this was not something that could be solved with just 3 heavenly thunders. From the moment Tian Jizi appeared until now, more than 4 bolts of lightning had struck Mose's body. For the past few days, there had only been 1 bolt of lightning a day, and each bolt was more terrifying than the last. After only 4 bolts of lightning, Mose, who was sitting at the peak of the mountain, had his robes charred black. His black hair was also disheveled. The 5th bolt of lightning is coming. Fengzhou looked at the sky and muttered. She could not hide the worry in her eyes. Chapter 45-39. As they were talking, a loud rumbling sound came from the sky. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky and struck down fiercely along with the heavenly thunder. Boom. With a loud sound, Fengzhou, who was 100 meters away, saw the lightning strike accurately on Mose's body. Even though she was standing 100 meters away, she could clearly feel the terrifying power contained in the lightning. She watched as the lightning struck Mose's body. With the naked eye, she could see the blue electric current flowing through his body. As for him, the clothes on his body were burnt. Even the defensive vest inside was shattered by that strike and turned into ashes. The smell of burnt flesh wafted over, causing her face to turn pale. She couldn't help but lift her foot and was about to step forward when Tianjizi reached out and grabbed her wrist. "You can't go." As Tianjizi spoke, he looked ahead with a solemn expression. "The power of this lightning is no small matter. You can't help him." Fengzhou pursed her lips and looked ahead. She silently retracted her foot, and the hands under her sleeves were tightly clenched into fists. The two stood there, and neither of them spoke. As the days passed, Fengzhou didn't move even half a step, as if her feet were nailed to the ground. She watched as Xianyuan Mose endured the lightning strikes day by day. She watched as the wounds from the previous day had not healed, and the next day, the lightning struck again. She watched as the injuries on his body worsened day by day, and even spat out blood, but she was powerless. On the other side, at the floating Chance Immortal Island in the mortal realm. When Hao-Er walked out of the room, he saw Mu Chen and Mu Yu sitting at the stone table in the courtyard in a daze. He didn't know what the two of them were thinking, but they were in a daze and didn't even notice him coming out. Seeing this, he was slightly startled. He walked forward and asked, "Chen, Yu, what's wrong?" Hearing his voice, the two little fellows came back to their senses. Before Mu Chen could speak, he saw Yu Er's delicate little face carrying a bit of fear, and her soft voice revealed a bit of helplessness. Big brother, Yu Er might die. Hao Er's heart tightened and his expression changed. Don't talk nonsense. Why would you say that? It's true. Yu Er's eyes were a little red. She lowered her head and covered her heart with one hand. Yu Er's heart keeps beating. It's beating very fast, as if I'm about to die. Brother too. Brother, are we sick and about to die? Yu Er is so scared. At the end of her sentence, her voice was choked with sobs. She threw herself into Hao Er's arms and hugged him tightly. Hearing this, Hao Er gently patted her back and comforted her. It's okay. Yu Er, don't be afraid. Nothing will happen. He looked at Mu Chen and asked, Chen Er, are you the same as Yu Er? Mu Chen nodded. Actually, it's not always. It's just that occasionally, my heart will beat very fast, and there's a feeling of panic and fear. After a while, I'll recover, but he paused for a moment. It's already been a few days. It wasn't too serious a few days ago, but if that feeling comes again these 2 days, my heart will beat very fast, and that feeling will be very panicky. It's getting worse and worse. Chapter 45-40. Thus, he looked outside and asked, where did 17 go? He went to buy food for a while. He should be back soon. Mu Chen said. Hao Er said, then let's go. I'll take you to the medical hall in the city and let the doctor check if there's anything wrong with your bodies. He was also worried about their health, so he wanted to take them to the medical hall in the city. The three of them walked forward and passed through the array in the front yard. When they walked to the door, they saw 17 coming in from outside with a food box in his hand. Master Hao, Master Chen, miss you, are you going out? 17 looked at them in surprise. 17, you're back just in time. Hao Er stopped and looked at him. Which medical hall in the city has the best doctor? The most famous one in the city is Huichun Hall. Not only are there doctors, but there are also refiners and pharmacists. 17 quickly said and looked at the three of them. Is anyone feeling unwell? Do you want me to call a doctor? No need, let's go directly. Hao said. Chen Er and Yu Er feel a little unwell. I want to take them there. It's quite a distance from here to Huichun Hall. I'll prepare a carriage. He was about to turn when he remembered the food box in his hand and asked, Master, Miss, do you want to eat something before going out? Hao Er thought for a while and looked at Mu Chen and Mu Yu. He went forward and took the food box. Go prepare the carriage. We'll eat here. He carried the food box and brought the two children back to the small hall in the front yard. He put the food out and said, eat a little. I don't know how long it will take. Perhaps the two children were worried and scared, so they didn't eat much. After eating a little, they couldn't eat anymore. Seeing this, Hao Er also casually ate a few mouthfuls. Not long after, 17 came to report that the carriage was ready. Thus, they sat in the carriage and went to Huichun Hall. As the city's #1 medical hall, Huichun Hall didn't have many customers because not only were the medicines sold expensive, but even the consultation was also very expensive. Ordinary people wouldn't come here unless they had a big problem that other medical halls and doctors couldn't solve. Most of the time, those who appeared in the Huichun Hall, other than those who came for consultation, were people who came to buy medicine or elixirs. When 17 drove the carriage to Huichun Hall, he stopped the horse and said to the three young masters, Master, Miss, Huichun Hall. Hao Er lifted the curtain and took a look. He saw that the courtyard was empty and there were only 3 to 5 people inside. Thinking about what 17 told them on the way here, he immediately got off the carriage and led Mu Chen and Yu Er down. 17 stopped the horse carriage at the side and followed behind them into the rejuvenation hall. The pharmacy apprentice saw that the three children had outstanding appearances, and that the material of their robes was of the highest quality. Furthermore, they were accompanied by a black-clothed guard. Thus, he approached them with a smile and inquired. "Little master, what are you looking for?" "We're here for consultation. Ask the best doctor here to come." Hao said with the appearance of a little adult. Because he was already a young boy with an outstanding temperament, the medicine hall's apprentice didn't dare to look down on him. Chapter 45-41. This is Dr. Feng from our Huichun Hall. He has been practicing medicine for decades and has excellent skills. The pharmacist then turned to the old man. "Dr. Feng, these are here for consultation." The old man stroked his beard and looked at the children before him. He then looked at the guard standing behind them and asked, "Who wants to be consulted? Give me your hand." Before Hao could speak, Mu Chen walked forward and sat on the stool in front of him. "Me." At the same time, he put his hand on a cushion. The old man reached out to check his pulse and stroked his beard with his other hand. After a while, he retracted his hand and looked seriously at Mu Chen's face. Finally, he said, "You're not sick, your body is very good. It's just that you've been a little restless these past 2 nights and can't sleep well. I'll prescribe you some calming medicine later and you'll be fine." Mu Chen saw that he did not ask anything and could tell that he had been restless these past 2 days. He pursed his lips and looked at his elder brother. Hao saw this and said, "My brother's heart has been beating very fast these past few days and he's feeling uneasy and panicked. Is there really no other problem?" Doctors hated being questioned the most. Hearing Hao's words, Dr. Feng's face darkened. "He's just restless, there's no other problem. His body is very good. Even if you find a few more patients for him, they'll say the same." His hand that was stroking his beard paused and he looked at Hao. "It's such a small symptom, this old man won't make a mistake." Hearing this, Hao said to Yu, "Come here." Mu Chen stood up and stood to the side. Yu went forward and sat down. She blinked at the old man in front of her and said with a bit of fear in her childish voice, "Grandpa, I haven't been sleeping well these past few days. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and sometimes I jump very fast here. When I jump very fast, I get very scared. Grandpa, am I seriously ill? Will I die?" The little girl's tender voice was filled with fear and helplessness. Her small appearance was so cute and lovable. When Dr. Feng saw this, he couldn't help but think of his own granddaughter. As a result, his originally gloomy face eased a little. He smiled and said slowly, "Don't be afraid. Come, give me your hand. Let me have a look." Yu nodded her head, stretched out her small hand and placed it on the cushion, while looking at him stretching out his hand to check her pulse. After taking her pulse, Dr. Feng carefully looked at her face. Finally, he said, "Young lady, don't worry. You're not sick. Your body is fine. However, you're just like your brother, feeling uneasy. This isn't a big deal. You'll be fine after taking some calming medicine. Thank you, Grandpa." Seeing this, Yu sweetly thanked him. Hao thought for a moment and said, "Then get the doctor to prescribe some calming medicine." Dr. Feng glanced at him and wrote down a prescription. 17 took the prescription and went to the front to pick the herbs. Hao asked Dr. Feng about some things to pay attention to. After thanking him, he took his sister-in-law to the front to look for Jiang Qisheng. Then, he heard a reprimand coming from the front. "You bastard! Look where you're going." It was a man's scolding voice. It was very clear in this quiet Huichun hall. When Hao, Mu Chen and Mu Yu came over, the three people's expressions changed slightly because the person being scolded was none other than 17, who went to pick the herbs and pay the bill. Chapter 45-42. At this moment, 17 was glaring angrily at the man who slapped him and the woman beside him. They were the ones who bumped into him earlier, but before he could react, they had already raised their hands to slap him. It was so fast and fierce that he did not even know how they did it. All he knew was that one side of his ear was ringing and the other side of his face was burning with pain. 17, what's going on? Hao walked over and asked coldly. Young master. 17 suppressed his anger and took a step back. Moving his lips, he shook his head and said, Young master, let's go back. It was just a slap, he had endured it. They had no power here, and no one to back them up. As an adult, he knew that under such circumstances, he could not cause trouble for the young masters and ladies. Go back. Ha! You haven't apologized to us yet. You want to leave now? The man saw that 17 had retreated and laughed coldly. His tone was arrogant and contemptuous, and his gaze fell on him. Answer. Hao said coldly. Hearing this, 17 paused for a moment, then said, I had paid the bill and was about to look for young master when they bumped into me. However, just as I was about to back away, this man gave me a slap. Yes, I slapped you. What's wrong? The man said arrogantly, taking a step forward and raising his hand to slap 17's face again. But at this time, he felt a pain in his calf and his knee bent. He actually knelt down with a cry of pain. Hiss. Ah! The man knelt down unexpectedly, his hands tightly hugging his leg. At first glance, it looked like he was kneeling in front of 17. 17 was stunned. Looking at the small figure standing at the side, he called out blankly, Young Master Chen. At that moment, he only saw young Master Chen step forward and kick the man's calf. That kick must have hit the man's bone. The man's cry of pain was very pitiful. He hit you, so hit him back. Mu Chen said with a straight face. His small figure stood there, looking like a little adult. He didn't think too much about it. He only knew that 17 was one of them and he couldn't let anyone bully her. Brother! The girl beside him exclaimed and reached out to push him away. What are you doing? Unfortunately, she did not manage to push him away because he avoided her. Little brat! I'll kill you! The man cursed while covering his leg. He stood up and reached for Mu Chen's collar. Hao, who was standing at the side, naturally wouldn't let him touch Mu Chen. Seeing that man make a move, just when he was about to make a move, he heard Yu's voice. Big brother, use this. Yu took out a broom from who knows where, and directly handed the broom to her big brother. The apothecary, who didn't want to cause any trouble, watched from the side. When he saw the little girl actually pick up the broom and hand it over, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Whose child was this? It was really. Hao glanced at Yu then took the broom from her hand. At the same time, he pushed Mu Chen to the back, and the broom in his hand directly slapped towards that man. Ah! Damned little brat! The broom directly hit his face. He only felt a pain in his nose, followed by a warm feeling. 2 streams of blood flowed from his nostrils. Brother! Brother, your nose is bleeding. Chapter 45-43. Hearing this, Yu's eyes widened. Her clear and innocent eyes were full of astonishment and astonishment. She glared at the girl and complained to her brother. Brother, she's scolding us. A mad dog always barks. Don't mind her. Hao glanced at the man with the nosebleed and said to 17 and Mu Chen, let's go. He threw the broom in his hand to the pharmacist and held Yu's little hand as they walked out. However, just as they were about to leave, the man who had recovered wiped his nosebleed and punched Hao's back. Want to leave? You'll have to ask my fist first. Hey, be careful. The pharmacist saw the man attacking from behind and couldn't help but whisper a warning. After all, The man was only a child in his teens. How could he withstand the power of his punch? If this punch landed on the child's body, he was afraid that even if he didn't die, he would be crippled. Hao narrowed his eyes when he felt the fierce wind from the punch coming from behind him. He turned around and grabbed the hand that was attacking him and bent it downwards. At the same time, the tip of his foot flew up and kicked that person's chin. He spun in the air and landed steadily. At that moment, that person's bones were broken and he screamed in pain. The next moment, he fell backward. Bam! Brother! With a loud thud, the young girl cried out in alarm. She hurried to his side and helped him up. She looked at the child with a cold face in shock. You. Blood seeped out of the man's mouth. His chin hurt so much that he couldn't speak. His hand was in so much pain that he couldn't even raise it. The pharmacist was already dumbfounded and stood at the side with a broom. Even Dr. Feng, who heard the commotion and came out to take a look, was stunned by the scene. 17 and Mu Chen came to Hao's side. Hao looked at the man who had fallen to the ground with a frosty expression and said coldly, "This is just a lesson. If you dare to attack us again, I will cripple you." No one tried to stop them. They just watched as the 3 children left with their guards. After a long while, a deep and dignified voice came, causing Dr. Feng to come back to his senses. "Find a carriage and send this young master back." The apothecary and old Dr. Feng hurriedly turned their heads when they heard the voice. They saw a middle-aged man wearing a black brocade robe standing at the top of the stairs on the 2nd floor. When they saw him, they hurriedly bowed. "Boss." After saluting, the apothecary hurriedly stepped forward to help the man up. He then went outside to find a carriage to send the man off. After exiting the rejuvenation hall, 17 drove the carriage and led them away. She asked, "Young master, are we going back or are we going to other places?" "Let's go to the candy store at the end of the street for some sugar water," Hao said as he looked at Mu Chen and Mu Yu. "I'll bring you 2 to drink some sugar water before we go back. Is there anything else you want to eat?" "Big brother will take you to eat." The 2 little guys shook their heads. "Big brother, the old doctor said that we are not sick. Is that true?" "Yes, since the doctor said so, there should be nothing wrong with your bodies. Don't worry," Hao said. Chapter 45-44. Shichi, who was driving the carriage, was also worried. "Young master, we beat someone up today. I'm afraid that person won't let it go. Should we avoid them? We were just defending ourselves. Why would we be afraid of them finding trouble with us?" Hao's eyes turned cold when he thought of that person's cursing and injuring actions. Breaking his hand was already teaching him a lesson. If he still dared to find trouble with them, then what was the harm in fighting again? His parents had taught him that he shouldn't cause trouble, but he shouldn't be afraid of trouble either. If someone bullied him, he shouldn't endure it. He should teach them a lesson first. Even if he couldn't beat them, he could still escape first. However, he had thought about it before he attacked. The strength of the people on Floating Fate Immortal Island wasn't very strong. His strength was enough to deal with some trouble. If not, there was still the Silver Wolf to protect them. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of those people finding trouble with them. Hearing his words, 17 didn't say anything else. When they arrived at the sweet water shop, they found a table to sit down and drink sweet water. At this moment, Hao's eyes moved slightly. He silently glanced at a certain spot on the street and then retracted his gaze. Someone was following them. Who was it? Was it the man who was beaten up in Rejuvenation Hall? Or was it someone else? He pondered but didn't show it on his face. After drinking the sugar water with his sister-in-law, he didn't wander around other places. Instead, he sat in the carriage and returned to the small courtyard. When the carriage arrived at the entrance of the small courtyard, he felt that the person who had been following them left after seeing them enter the small courtyard. In the attic of Rejuvenation Hall, a secret guard was reporting his findings after following them. This subordinate watched them enter the small courtyard and left. After that, I asked around and found out that there were only 3 children and a guard living in that small courtyard. They rented it not long ago. After they moved in, they rarely went out. Usually, only their guard went out to the restaurant to bring back some food. This subordinate asked around, but no one knew where they came from. Hearing this, the black-robed man sitting and drinking tea waved his hand. The secret guard quietly left. After a while, another secret guard came in. Master, the one who was beaten is the second young master of the Yang family in the city. The Yang family has sent people to inquire about the background of those children. Other than that, the Yang family has not made any other movements. You may leave. The black-robed middle-aged man said as he played with the teacup in his hand. After the secret guard left, the middle-aged man asked, "What do you think?" Behind him, an old man stepped forward and said, "Master, that guard's strength is only at the second layer of the Qi refining realm. The twins aren't very strong, but their spiritual aura is very pure, which is very rare. As for the teenager, his skills are extraordinary, and his aura is restrained. Even I can't tell the extent of his strength." The black-clothed middle-aged man's expression changed slightly as he said, "Those 3 children are still young, but they have a noble aura. Especially the older one, his methods are even more ruthless. An ordinary clan wouldn't be able to raise such a child." His voice paused for a moment before he said, "The people from the aristocratic families in the city more or less know a little about him, but there are very few disciples who can compare with him. It seems that he should be the son of an aristocratic family from another city." Chapter 45-45. The black-clothed middle-aged man tapped his hand on the table. After pondering for a while, his eyes flashed and he said, "Elder Yuan, you should personally go and watch those children. Let's see how the Yang family deals with this matter. Before the Yang family makes a move, don't alert the enemy." When the old man heard this, he paused for a moment before asking, "Why does the boss want to keep an eye on those children? Those children had no interaction with them. Even if he was curious, why would he need to keep an eye on them personally?" "Haha." The black-clothed middle-aged man chuckled. He gently turned the teacup in his hand and asked, "Elder Yuan, did you clearly see that little boy's move today?" The old man was startled and shook his head, "I didn't see it clearly." At that time, they hadn't thought that the little boy would counterattack so quickly, so they hadn't been able to clearly see his movements and speed. They only knew that by the time they saw him, he had already grabbed the Yang family's second young master's hand, and at the same time, kicked the other party's chin. The black-clothed middle-aged man said thoughtfully, "Looking at all the families in the city, there isn't a 10-year-old boy with that kind of courage and speed. Not to mention, that little boy's strength can't be seen. It is obvious that he is hiding it. Tell me, what kind of secret cultivation method is that even you and I can't see through?" Hearing this, the old man's heart moved. He lowered his gaze and looked at the black-clothed middle-aged man. "Boss means these children have a noble aura, but they don't have any strong cultivators protecting them. They came here to rent a small courtyard and live in seclusion. I'm guessing that they are refugees and must have some kind of treasure on them." The black-clothed middle-aged man said and looked at the old man, "Do you understand what I mean?" The old man's heart skipped a beat and he quickly lowered his head. "I understand. Go. If this matter is done well, I will reward you greatly," he said in a calm voice. "Yes," the old man replied and then left. When he closed the door, he raised his head with a complicated look in his eyes. At his age, even if there was some kind of treasure, he wouldn't care too much about it. Especially when it came to these young children, he couldn't bear to do it. However, he knew that if he didn't do it well, boss would send someone else to do it. He sighed softly in his heart and then walked away. On the other side, the Yang family. Listening to his subordinate's report, the Yang family head's face darkened as he frowned and said, "Only the 3 children and the guards are renting that small courtyard? Have you found out everything? Can't you find out where they come from?" Reporting to Patriarch, I was unable to find out their origins. However, I did hear from a Lin family guard that I was on good terms with that he mentioned these 3 children. The guard replied. "Oh. What's the matter?" Patriarch Yang raised his eyebrows and asked. The guard hurriedly said, "This subordinate knows a guard brother from the Lin family. When he went out to investigate, he also heard a few words from him. These 3 children are secretly protected by experts. The Lin family has suffered losses because of this. In the end, this matter was suppressed by the Lin family head. He even sent people to bring gifts to apologize, but they couldn't even enter the door of that small courtyard. There's such a thing." Patriarch Yang was slightly taken aback. "What is going on here? Tell me in detail." Chapter 45-46. Hearing this, Master Yang stared at him and paused for a moment before saying, "Then go and try to fish for more information. I want to know their origin and what grudges they have with the Lin family. What kind of loss did the Lin family suffer and why were they suppressed? Go and find out for me. I will reward you handsomely later." "Yes." The guard hurriedly responded and retreated. The next day, after finding out that the Lin family had suffered a loss, he also found out that there were experts secretly guarding the small courtyard. Thus, after much consideration, the Yang family head decided to suppress the news of his son being beaten. The Lin family's influence was not small. If the Yang family were to touch someone who could make the Lin family suffer a loss, it would be a little too tactless. If this matter was spread out and people knew that the Lin family had made things difficult for the children, they would be in the wrong no matter what. Since those children could not be touched and could not be quietly dealt with, this matter could only be put aside. In the small courtyard, Hao, and the rest spent another 2 days peacefully. In these 2 days, Hao spent most of his time cultivating and occasionally gave pointers to Mu Qin, Mu Yu, and 17. After drinking the calming soup, the 2 children slept soundly at night. Their usual uneasiness also faded a little, but there was still a period of time every day when their hearts palpitated with fear. "Big brother, that soup doesn't seem to be better. What should we do?" Yu leaned on the table and said with a bitter face. Mu Qin also said, "Me too. I don't want to drink that soup anymore." "If you don't want to drink it, then don't drink it." Hao said, "Take it easy these days and don't cultivate. See if it will be like this if you don't cultivate." Just as he finished speaking, he saw Mu Qin and Mu Yu's faces suddenly turn slightly pale and sweat seeped out of their foreheads. Both of them clutched at their clothes and looked pained. "Qin, Yu, Hao panicked and an anxious and worried expression appeared on his little face. "That feeling is coming again," Mu Qin said as he leaned on the table and rubbed his chest with one hand while groaning. "Master Qin, miss you." 17 saw them and couldn't help but worry. 17, carry Qin, into the room. Hao, hurriedly said and went forward to carry Yu, and quickly returned to the room. 17 quickly stepped forward and carried Mu Qin into the room. She placed him on the bed and retreated to the side. Hao, sat behind the 2 of them on the bed. He gathered spiritual power in his palms and said to them, "Take a deep breath." At the same time, he gathered spiritual power in his palms and gently rubbed their backs. The 2 little fellows listened to his words, closed their eyes, and breathed deeply according to his instructions. After about half an incense stick of time, the feeling gradually faded. They exhaled lightly and slowly opened their eyes. "How is it? Are you feeling better?" Hao hurriedly asked when he saw that their bodies had relaxed. "Big brother, that feeling has disappeared again," Mu Qin said as he clutched his chest, feeling a little strange. Big brother, why are we like this? Why would Big Brother and I feel heartache together? Yu asked in puzzlement. Chapter 45-47. Actually, I've been thinking for the past few days. Maybe it's not because of anything else, but because of the blood connection. You sensed that something happened to your parents. Hao looked at the two of them and saw that they were slightly stunned. He said, "This is just my guess. After all, my parents are very strong. At that time, the Devil Lord was also destroyed. Looking at all the realms, there shouldn't be anyone who would be their enemy. Then what happened to father and mother?" The two little guys asked worriedly. Hao shook his head. "I don't know. We can't get any news about them here. Even if something happened, we won't know. Then let's go. Let's go to that sect. Didn't Big Brother say that there will definitely be a way to leave here and go to other realms? Maybe we can go back from there." Mu Qin said with a trace of eagerness on his little face. "Big Brother, are we going?" Yu also looked up and asked. Hao thought for a while and said, "Okay. Let's prepare to go to that sect and think of a way to go back as soon as possible." As he spoke, he looked at 17 who was waiting at the side and said, "Go and prepare some dry food, pastries and the like. We can eat on the way." "Yes." 17 responded and then turned to go out to prepare. They prepared for the whole day. The next morning, when the sky was about to brighten, 17 drove the carriage and led them to leave in the direction of the sect. After seeing them leave, the old man from Huichun Hall, who had been keeping an eye on them, sent a secret guard back to report. He himself followed behind and waited for an opportunity to act. When the owner of Huichun Hall heard the news, he immediately led his people to follow. He guessed that the children must have a treasure on them, so he couldn't let them leave just like that. The carriage went out of the city's western gate and went in the direction of the sect, galloping along the mountain road. Mu Chen and Mu Yu leaned against the car window and looked at the passing scenery outside. The morning breeze was refreshing and gently caressed their faces, making them squint their eyes comfortably and stretch lazily like two kittens. Hao closed his eyes to rest and didn't say anything along the way. It wasn't until the carriage was some distance away from the city that he suddenly opened his eyes. A cold light flashed across his eyes. "Big Brother, what's wrong?" Mu Chen asked when he saw the cold glint in his eyes. "Someone is following us," Hao said. Hearing this, Mu Chen and Mu Chen immediately became vigilant. 17, who was driving the carriage, lowered her voice and asked, "Young master, could it be that Huichun Hall offended someone?" "Let's continue. We'll know when they show themselves," Hao said. He looked at Mu Chen and Mu Yu and said, "Be alert and be careful." "Yes." The two little fellows nodded and sat down obediently. However, with their strength, they were unable to detect that someone was following them in the dark. Along the way, only a few people or carriages and horses would pass by occasionally. When the carriage reached a deserted mountain path, a figure suddenly appeared from behind and stepped on the head of the horse pulling the carriage and went down. Hiss! Bang! Chapter 45-48. Be careful. 17 exclaimed softly. At the same time, she supported herself with one hand on the carriage and leaned back to catch the falling figure. At the same time, she somersaulted in the air and steadily landed on the ground. After Hao saw that 17 had caught Yu he pulled Mu Chen and flew a few meters away, landing on the side of the mountain path. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Hao asked and lowered his head to check if the two little guys were injured. "No." The two shook their heads. Mu Chen's little face turned cold, and Yu frowned. Although they were not injured, they were suddenly frightened. Anyone would be in a bad mood. "Young master, the carriage is destroyed." 17 looked at the broken carriage and her face tensed up. Hao glanced at the destroyed carriage and turned his gaze to the 8 or 9 people who appeared in front of him. Seeing those people, his eyes moved slightly. Because these people were not the people they dealt with that day, but the owner of Rejuvenation Hall. At this time, including him, there were a total of 9 people. Among these 9 people, other than the owner who was a golden core cultivator, the 2 elders beside him were also golden core cultivators, and the remaining people were mid-stage foundation establishment cultivators. Dispatching a few golden core realm cultivators and a few mid-foundation establishment realm cultivators to deal with a few kids like them could already be considered to be extremely generous. After all, the cultivators in this world were generally weak, and these people could be said to be the backbone of the Rejuvenation Hall or even their forces. People from Rejuvenation Hall. What do you want to do? 17 shouted in a deep voice. Haha. The owner of the Rejuvenation Hall chuckled softly. He didn't look at 17, but at Hao. His gaze swept over Hao, and then at the 2 little ones. Then he said, I don't want to make things difficult for you children. As long as you leave behind the treasures on you, I can let you leave unharmed. Treasures? Hao's eyes moved and looked at him. What treasures? What treasures do you have? The eyes of the owner of Rejuvenation Hall flashed and he stared at him. Brother, didn't the owner of Rejuvenation Hall open such a big medicine store? Why would you be so poor as to rob us? Yu's immature voice carried a bit of surprise. Clearly, she hadn't thought that the people of Rejuvenation Hall would actually be following behind them. Mu Chen snorted coldly, his voice cold with a bit of disdain as he said, evil intentions, a beast in a human's face. Can it be said that I am a wolf in sheep's clothing? Yu asked while blinking her eyes. Mu Chen thought for a while. It's too easy to be right. Then is he the owner of Rejuvenation Hall? Or bandits blocking the road to rob? Yu curiously asked. The 2 4-year-old children were staring at them and sizing them up as they spoke. Their childish words and innocent gazes made Elder Yuan, who was standing behind the owner of the Rejuvenation Hall, lower his head in shame. He didn't even dare to look at them. Chapter 45-49. Do it. The owner of the Rejuvenation Hall coldly glanced at Hao, and the others. With a command, several cultivators behind him rushed forward and rushed towards Hao, and the others. 17, take care of Chen, and Yu, Hao said in a cold voice, indicating for them to step back. At the same time, he moved his hand and a long sword with a cold light appeared in his hand. His spiritual power surged and the sword chi instantly attacked. It was like a bolt of lightning that struck towards the cultivators at a speed that was too fast for the ears to cover. Ah! Hiss! How is this possible? For a moment, screams accompanied by gasps of pain rang out in disbelief. They originally thought that it was a waste of talent for them to capture a few children. When they made their move, they did not think that these children would be able to avoid it, but who would have thought that? Hao was at the peak of the Golden Core realm. Once his Golden Core aura spread out, whether it was in terms of speed or strength, it crushed those intermediate foundation establishment cultivators. A mere intermediate foundation establishment cultivator against a Golden Core cultivator was like a child against an adult. There was no chance or possibility of fighting back. Moreover, how could they have imagined that this little youth, who was only about 10 years old, had already reached the Golden Core realm? Not to mention those intermediate foundation establishment cultivators, even the owner of the Rejuvenation Hall and the 2 elders, who were Golden Core realm cultivators, looked at the little figure in shock and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Golden Core realm cultivator. How is this possible? Hiss. This child is actually a Golden Core realm cultivator. If it was said that they had suspected that these children had precious treasures on them before, then at this moment, when they saw the Golden Core realm emanating from this little youth, they were very sure that these children definitely had precious treasures on them. Perhaps it was a treasure of heaven and earth that could allow one to advance. Otherwise, based on his age of around 10 years old, how could he have reached the golden core stage? Thinking of this, the three people's breathing became heavy. Even Elder Yuan, who felt somewhat ashamed of attacking the children earlier, stared at the three children with light in his eyes and hurried breathing. To be able to reach the golden core realm at such a young age, if one were to say that he did not have any heaven and earth treasures, or a top cultivation method or treasure on him, they would not believe it no matter what. Not to mention anything else, if they could obtain a top-notch cultivation technique or a treasure that could help them break through to the next level, perhaps, their Jindan cultivation would suddenly rise to the next level, and their lifespan would increase again. Thinking of this, the blood in his body could not help but boil. This was really an unexpected surprise. As long as they could take down these children, they would definitely be able to pry open their mouths and get whatever they wanted from them. With Hao-Er's peak golden core strength, she naturally knew that the three golden core cultivators' breathing had become rapid and excited. He pursed his lips, the sword in his hand pointing diagonally at the ground. The blade of the sword was so clean that there was not a trace of blood on it, because it was only sword chi that attacked. His indifferent and deep gaze swept across the two dead foundation establishment cultivators on the ground, as well as the four cultivators who were clutching their wounds and retreating in shock. The sword in his hand spun with his hand, and sword shadows shot out. He looked at the owner of the Return of Spring Hall and the two old men and coldly said, "If you leave now, I can pretend that nothing happened." Chapter 45-50. Hao-Er tightened his grip on his sword. "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." The little boy held the sword in his hand like a king who held the power of life and death. His tone was domineering and confident, cold and bloodthirsty. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed that this came from the mouth of a 10-year-old boy. Old Man Yuan's eyes moved slightly when he heard this. He looked at the child and said, "Hand over everything. Our master said that you can leave with your lives. You have to know that once you die, you'll have nothing left. Moreover, even if you're a golden core cultivator, all three of us are golden core cultivators. Not to mention you're only a little youth around the age of 10. How can you fight us? Even if you fight us, you can't beat the three of us alone. Is that so? You can try." Hao-Er was unmoved. He stood in front of Mu Chen and Mu Yu and stared at them. The boss of Rejuvenation Hall sneered. "Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame us for being rude." He then said, "Elder Yuan, Elder He, take them down." "Yes." The two answered and rushed out without hesitation. Long swords appeared in their hands. Hao-Er gestured with one hand behind his back, telling Mu Chen and Mu Yu to retreat further. At the same time, his small figure rushed out to meet their attack. Mu Yu was a little worried. Will Big Brother lose? Mu Chen pursed his lips and didn't say anything. His gaze was fixed on the battle in front of him. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he caught sight of the four injured Foundation Establishment cultivators quietly approaching them under the hand signal of the Rejuvenation Hall's master. "Be careful," Mu Chen whispered, reminding his sister and 17. However, just as Mu Chen was about to warn them, the Foundation Establishment cultivators rushed forward and reached out to grab the two younger ones. They couldn't deal with the big one, but they were more than enough to deal with the two little ones. "Get lost!" 17 shouted. Her hand on her waist moved. She pulled out her sword and slashed at the Foundation Establishment cultivator. However, even though he was strictly trained as a secret guard, it was still difficult for him to fight against a mid-stage Foundation Establishment cultivator. He had only just moved when he was kicked away by one of the cultivators. "You overestimate yourself." Their hearts were burning with anger. They were just following their boss on a trip, yet they didn't do anything and already lost two people. That was because they didn't expect that little demon to actually be a core formation cultivator. They could accept the fact that they suffered a loss when encountering a core formation cultivator, but this insignificant second layer aura refining cultivator actually dared to attack them. He really overestimated his capabilities. Pooh! 17 was kicked viciously and was sent flying several meters away. He fell into a small forest by the side of the road and spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt a burning pain in his chest and tried to stand up, but he fell back down with a plop. 17. You, exclaimed, and her pair of beautiful eyes angrily glared, just like a provoked kitten. All the hair on her body stood up. Come with us obediently. A cultivator sneered, and extended his hand to grab you, But who would have thought that little girl actually jumped up, and with an extremely fast speed, unexpectedly collided with him. Chapter 45-51. Bang! That cultivator fell straight to the ground, shocking the other 3 cultivators who wanted to catch Mu Chen. Their expressions changed and they instinctively retreated, thinking that they had encountered another abnormal golden core cultivator. Unexpectedly, when they retreated, their gazes swept over the 2 children and found that there was no change in their spiritual aura, nor was there any aura of the golden core stage. Immediately, they let out a light sigh, but also became more cautious. Mu Chen and Mu Yu stood back to back, guarding against a sneak attack. Both of them held daggers in their hands and stared vigilantly at the cultivators. They might be able to take advantage of them when they were unprepared, but if they were to fight head-on, the 2 of them would not be able to defeat them. In front of them, Hao was surrounded by 2 golden core cultivators. He relied on his superior martial arts and cultivation methods to suppress them, but when facing 2 golden core cultivators with rich combat experience, he could not free himself to help Mu Chen and Mu Yu behind him. When he saw the 3 cultivators surround them, he gritted his teeth and retreated to avoid the attacks of the 2 golden core cultivators while approaching them. At this moment, when he saw the 2 golden core cultivators slashing 2 sword chi towards him, he immediately leaped into the air and landed beside Mu Chen and Mu Yu, leading them to avoid the 2 attacks. Whoosh! Whoosh! Ah! Hiss! The 3 cultivators didn't pay attention to the battle on their side. They were focused on the 2 strange children. However, they didn't expect that by the time they sensed danger, the 2 sword chi had already attacked them. They couldn't dodge in time. They screamed and 2 more people fell. The remaining person had an arm chopped off by the sword chi. Ah! My arm! A bloody arm flew out, drawing an arc in the air and landing beside 17, who was a few meters away. The cultivator who had his arm chopped off staggered a few steps due to the loss of blood and heavy injuries, then fell to the ground and fainted. Looking at the severed arm and smelling the stench of blood in the air, 17 was stunned. She then looked at the 3 young masters. Seeing that they were fine, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Seeing that the Foundation Establishment stage cultivators had all been killed, the remaining 3 Golden Core stage cultivators were still a little shaken. It was just a few children, but they had lost so many of their men. For a moment, the 2 old men felt a trace of fear in their hearts. It would be fine if he could take them down today, but if he couldn't, it would be troublesome. Go to 17, Hao said to the 2 of them. He had them step back while he walked forward step by step. When the 2 old men saw this, they attacked again. Their attacks became even more ferocious and ruthless. However, they did not expect the young man's moves to be so strange and unpredictable. Moreover, his attacks were extremely fast. Even though the 2 old men had used all their strength, they were still unable to take him down. As the battle continued, more and more wounds gradually appeared on their bodies. Perhaps seeing that the 2 Golden Core stage cultivators were unable to take him down, the eyes of the owner of the Rejuvenation Hall, who had been watching from the side, flickered. His gaze swept past the 3 people fighting and landed on the 2 children behind them. That young man was very concerned about the 2 young ones. As long as he captured the two young ones, he was not afraid that he would not be captured without a fight. Chapter 45-52. Even though this was a mountain path, there were still some people coming and going. Furthermore, as the battle continued, the airflow surged. Some cultivators who passed by stopped and hid in the distance to watch the battle. What surprised them was that the middle-aged man and the old man were actually dealing with 3 children. This made them feel somewhat astonished. However, the 3 of them were all golden core cultivators. That was a height that Qi condensation cultivators and foundation establishment cultivators like them couldn't reach. Thus, they didn't dare to meddle in other people's business and only hid in the shadows and watched from afar. I recognize that middle-aged man. He's the owner of the rejuvenation hall. Why would they attack the children? A cultivator said in a low voice. Children? Look at that child who's about 10 years old. He has the aura of a golden core cultivator. Furthermore, he's not at a disadvantage when fighting against the 2 golden core cultivators. Instead, he injured them all over. That's not something an ordinary child can do. That's true. Not to mention that it's not something a child can do, even a few adults would find it difficult to injure those 2. I guess only some elders and sect leaders in the sect can do that. Compared to that, I'm more curious about why the owner of the rejuvenation hall wants to attack the children. Another cultivator said in a low voice. His eyes shone as he watched the scene in front of him. None of the cultivators who were hiding to watch the show dared to meddle in other people's business. In fact, they did not even dare to show themselves. They could only hide in the shadows and watch. On the other side, Hauer turned the sharp sword in his hand. A sword flower followed the rotation of the sharp sword and attacked at lightning speed. In almost an instant, the robe of one of the old men who attacked in front of him was shattered by the sword flower. His entire body was also pushed back by the sword chi. Before he could recover, he saw the small figure in front of him and directly hit his chest with a palm. Bang! Pooh! A palm containing the aura of a peak gold core cultivator slammed down and forced the old man back. Hauer watched as the old man was sent flying and coughed out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as paper. Hauer pursed his lips and turned his cold gaze to the other old man. He didn't stop and attacked again. Behind them, the owner of Hui Chun Hall suddenly rushed forward and reached out to grab Mu Chen and Mu Yu. Seeing this scene, 17, who was on the ground, gritted her teeth and forcefully endured the intense pain from her internal injuries as she leaped up. She stood in front of the 2 little ones and shouted at the same time, "Hurry up and leave." Scram! The owner of the Return of Spring Hall had a cold look in his eyes. He changed his grip into a slap and slapped 17 away. With a loud bang, 17's body flew out like a kite with a broken string. 17. Mu Chen and Mu Yu exclaimed and quickly ran to where he fell. But this way, the 2 of them also became the owners of the Return of Spring Hall with their backs facing him, giving him an excellent opportunity to attack. Right when the owner of the Rejuvenation Hall flashed forward, Hauer heard the commotion behind him, and he turned around to look. He saw the scene of the owner of the Rejuvenation Hall grabbing towards his younger brother and sister, and his face instantly turned grim while killing intent surged in his eyes. "You're courting death." Chapter 45-53. A.O. A wolf howl accompanied by the coercion of a sacred beast was heard. The powerful sound and coercion that seemed to have come from ancient times soared into the sky, causing everyone's eardrums to hurt. Their legs went soft, and they immediately knelt down. The large area was instantly enveloped by a powerful pressure. The birds that were originally perched on the branches fell to the ground with a plop, unable to move. Following the sound of the wolf howl, the surroundings instantly became silent. It was strangely quiet, so quiet that it made one's heart flutter. When the owner of the Rejuvenation Hall, who was about to grab the two children, suddenly heard the wolf howl. He was also shocked. When he turned around to look, the coercion had also enveloped him. He did not even have the chance to escape, and he knelt down with a plop. It was not that he wanted to kneel, but in front of the powerful coercion and the sacred beast that was emitting a terrifying aura, he was so frightened that his legs went soft. He could not stand up even if he wanted to. Ah! In the strange silence, a shrill scream suddenly sounded. That scream was miserable and sharp, breaking the silence in that instant. It reverberated in the sky and entered everyone's ears. However, no one made a sound, and no one made any movement. Even the sound of breathing seemed to have stopped. Regardless of whether it was the golden core old man who was heavily injured and was forced to retreat, or Elder Yuan who was standing there with his eyes wide open, or the cultivators who were hiding in the bushes and trees further away to watch the battle, all of them looked at the horrifying scene in front of them in horror. Their hairs stood on end, and they were so shocked that their hearts almost stopped beating. In front of them, a majestic giant silver wolf was stepping on the body of the owner of the rejuvenation hall. It bit off one of the owner's arms from his shoulder and threw it to one side. The wolf raised its claws, which were glowing with a sharp light, and tore off the owner's left leg. Fresh blood flowed and seeped into the ground. The bloody and cruel scene caused everyone to be scared silly. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Only the miserable screams of the owner of the Return of Spring Hall reverberated in their ears. The silver wolf licked the blood from the corner of its mouth and raised its sharp claws again. This time, it directly pressed down on the body of the person under its claws. A bloodthirsty voice came from its mouth, "Biting off your neck is too easy for you. If it weren't for the fact that I'm afraid of scaring my little masters, I really want to dig out your organs, tear you into pieces, and feed you to the wild beasts in the wilderness." It lowered its voice and lowered its head to whisper into the ear of the owner of the rejuvenation hall. Therefore, other than Hao, and a few others who were nearby, the people in the distance couldn't hear what it said at all. The bloodthirsty voice and ferocious words frightened the owner of the rejuvenation hall so much that he could not say a single word. He did not even have the chance to scream. He looked at the huge silver wolf that was stepping on him with its claws in horror. His eyes were filled with despair and regret. He never thought that the child was not only a golden core cultivator, but also had such a powerful divine beast. As for whether it was a divine beast or a supreme divine beast, to him, there was no difference anymore, because he knew that he was dead for sure. And he would die very miserably. Chapter 45-54. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised the long sword in his hand and stabbed it directly into the man's heart. The boss of the Huichun Hall widened his eyes in horror. He couldn't even scream. He only grunted and blood flowed out of his mouth. His body twitched slightly until he swallowed his last breath. His body stiffened and his eyes were still wide open in horror. Seeing that the human at its feet had died, the silver wolf turned back. Its bloodthirsty gaze fell on the two golden essence elders and it walked towards them step by step. Anyone who dared to have designs on its little master must die. Hao didn't stop it. He didn't even look at the two elders behind him. He pulled out the long sword, wiped the blood off it and put it away. Then he walked towards his younger siblings. "It's okay, don't be afraid." He patted their heads clumsily and comforted them in a low voice. Mu Chen and Mu Yu's originally tense bodies relaxed after hearing their elder brother's voice. It would be a lie to say that they weren't afraid. After all, they were only 4 years old. Even if they learned to kill and face danger, they would still feel fear, and helplessness in their hearts. Old Yuan looked at the huge silver wolf that was walking towards him, and his body couldn't help but tremble. His eyes were filled with despair and regret. If he hadn't followed, if he hadn't listened to Boss Yu's order and attacked the 3 children, perhaps he wouldn't have to face this scene. Thinking of the boss's limbs being torn off, his heart trembled. Withstanding the strong pressure, he raised his trembling hand, gritted his teeth, and slapped the top of his head. Rather than die without a complete corpse, he might as well end his own life. With a loud bang, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and fell straight back onto the ground. Pfft! The silver wolf snorted and exhaled 2 breaths from its nostrils. It glanced at the dead old man and walked towards the other one. Don't eat me, don't eat me. The other elder was seriously injured. Even if he wanted to escape, he couldn't under the strong and terrifying pressure. He begged for mercy with a pale face and his eyes were filled with fear and horror. However, Hao wouldn't allow him to live, and the silver wolf wouldn't allow him to live even more. Thus, the silver wolf stepped forward and raised its claws. A few streams of air slashed at the old man's throat, and several deep claw marks appeared. Blood gushed out as the old man screamed and fell to the ground with his eyes wide open. Looking at this scene, Mu Chen and Mu Yu pursed their lips. Both of them looked at it expressionlessly and took a deep breath. When they saw the silver wolf walking back, the 2 little ones finally came back to their senses and remembered 17, who was seriously injured beside them. Big brother, 17's injury is very serious, she can't walk. Yu said, looking at 17, who had pale complexion and was staring at the silver wolf in front of her. He seemed to be frightened by the huge silver wolf in front of him. At this time, his body was stiff and he didn't move at all. His eyes didn't even blink. 17. Mu Chen patted 17, who was being supported by them. 17's body tilted and he fell to the ground, unconscious. 17. Mu Chen and Mu Yu were shocked. They thought he was dead and couldn't help but exclaim. Chapter 45-55. Hearing this, Hao pursed his lips and looked back at the corpses on the ground. He stepped forward and took their cosmos bags and put them into the space. Then, he took out a flying device and threw it into the air. He said to the silver wolf, "Bring him up." As he spoke, he pulled Mu Chen and Mu Yu and leaped up. Seeing this, the silver wolf lowered its head and bit 17's collar. It leaped up and sent him up the flying device. At the same time, it shrunk its huge body and stood guard at the side. The frozen cultivators who were further away finally heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the flying device leaving with the children and the wolf. Their legs went soft and they fell to the ground one by one. Looking at the mountain path in front of them that was filled with scattered limbs and corpses, their faces turned pale and they couldn't say a word for a long time. On the other side, Hao and the others were flying above the clouds in the flying device. At this moment, they were looking at the pale 17 lying on the flying device. The atmosphere was a little heavy. "Big brother, will 17 die?" Yu asked with reddened eyes. "I don't want him to die." 17 had been with them for so long and they already had feelings for him. They didn't want him to die like this. "Big brother, are there any pills in the space that 17 can take?" Mu Chen asked as he looked at Hao. At this moment, Hao was looking for pills. He found that there were also pills for internal injuries in the cosmos bag of the owner of the rejuvenation hall. Hence, he took one out and stuffed it into 17's mouth. He said to them, "This is the pill from the owner of the rejuvenation hall. I've seen it. Although it's not as good as the pills refined by Mother, it has a good healing effect. Let him eat it first. When we reach the next town, we'll find a doctor to take a look at him." Hearing his words, the 2 little ones looked at 17 to see if his aura would gradually stabilize. The flying device flew in the air. As it disappeared into the clouds, it didn't attract the attention of others. It wasn't until noon when they found that 17's breath was gradually stabilizing that they sighed in relief. "Big brother, that pill is also effective, give 17 another one." Yu finally smiled. She thought, at least this way, 17 won't die. However, Hao shook his head and said, every medicine is 30% poisonous, especially the pills refined in the mortal world. Even if they are considered top grade, they can't be as pure as mother's pills. Therefore, now that his breath has stabilized, don't use any more medicine. Wait until he sees a doctor before making any plans. But we don't have a carriage now, and 17 is unconscious. How are we going to enter the city? Mu Chen asked with a frown. Hao thought for a moment and said, after we find the outskirts of the next town, we'll find a place for you to rest. Let the silver wolf guard you. I'll go into the city to buy a carriage and bring you in. Why don't I just carry him into the city? It would be troublesome, the silver wolf said. That's too conspicuous. Hao shook his head in disagreement. Chapter 45-56. You mean, since we can't keep a low profile, we should keep a high profile? Hao looked at it and asked. Yes. The three of you don't have any powerful people protecting you, but you have outstanding looks and temperaments. It's easy for people to target you. Since that's the case, why not keep a high profile? At least, if I show up and follow you, ordinary people won't dare to target you. Even if they do target you, they'll have to think twice. The silver wolf looked at them and said, besides, aren't we going directly to that sect to find a way to go back? If we keep a low profile, they won't tell you even if they have a way. Why don't we go there in a high profile? If they ask, we can say that you're the descendants of the upper realm's aristocratic families who came down to the mortal world to gain experience. It's just that you can't go back for some reason. Let them help you. When we go back, we'll thank them with generous gifts. I think it'll be easier. Hao couldn't help but think when he heard this. He seriously thought about the silver wolf's idea. After a while, he said, what you said makes sense. It's just that I'm worried that before Dad and Mom arrive, we'll arrive at Dad and Mom's enemy's house. Then, if that's the case, they might find out about you if we cause a big commotion. The silver wolf looked at the three of them and said, however, this is indeed a little risky, but I think there's no better way. Hao was silent for a while. He looked at Mu Chen and Mu Yu and asked, what do you think? The two little ones looked at each other and said, we'll listen to Big Brother. Hao paused and said, then let's do as the silver wolf says. Because what it said makes sense. It appeared today, and it won't be long before the various forces on Floating Fate Immortal Island know about it. Instead of that, it's better for us to appear in a high profile. Okay. The two little ones nodded. Thus, they went straight out of the city and got off the aircraft. The silver wolf carried 17 to the city gate while the three children followed at the side. Ah! Wolf, wolf! Hiss! This is a ferocious beast. It's not a ferocious beast. This is a spiritual beast. This is a spiritual beast that has been contracted. Hiss, this isn't an ordinary spiritual beast. This is the king of wolves, the silver wolf. And a divine beast at that. No one on the Floating Fate Immortal Island had ever seen a divine beast before. Therefore, when they saw such a huge wolf appear in front of them, they were all guessing and retreating. They looked on in fear and reverence. Even the city guards did not dare to stop them and allowed them to enter. There were no obstructions along the way. Hao found someone to ask for the name of the best medical clinic in the city and went on his way. As they entered the city, all the clans and forces in the city, whether underground or on the surface, heard that a huge silver wolf had entered the city. Even the city lord was alarmed. I heard that a giant wolf entered the city. And it wasn't a ferocious beast, but a spirit beast. Is that true? An ancestor of a clan was alarmed and hurried out to ask. It's true, father. All the powers in the city have received the news that a huge silver wolf, several meters tall, entered the city with a black-clothed man. Beside them were three extremely beautiful children. At this time, They have already gone to the Mo family's medical center. The middle-aged man hurriedly said to his father. Chapter 45-57. What are you talking about? I'll go with you to take a look. As the old man spoke, he walked out and asked, What rank is that silver wolf? Didn't you get the news? Apart from the 3 children, are there no strong people protecting them? The middle-aged man followed closely beside him and said, Father, it's not like you don't know what kind of high-rank spirit beasts have appeared in our area. Even if there were, I don't think anyone would be able to recognize the silver wolf's rank. But I heard from the people in the city that the wolf's aura and aura were very intimidating. I reckon it's not an ordinary spirit beast. The father and son spoke as they hurried out. At the same time, the other aristocratic families in the city were also alarmed. They all planned to personally see what was going on. Even the city lord didn't care about anything else and personally went to the Mo family's medical center. At this time, the entrance of the Mo family's medical center was tightly packed. There was no one else inside except for Hao, and the shrunken silver wolf. As for the people outside, they couldn't enter even if they wanted to. Doctor, take a look at his injuries, Hao, said as his gaze fell on the unconscious 17. Because their movements were too loud, the one who came out was the old master of the Mo family's medical center. Even at his age, when he saw such a silver wolf for the first time, he was also a little frightened. Naturally, he didn't dare to be careless and carefully examine 17. After a while, he said, his internal organs are injured. He should have taken a pill to treat internal injuries, but it can only stabilize the internal injuries and can't heal them. Even if I give him medicine and let him drink it for more than 10 days, I'm afraid he will be crippled by the time he recovers. Crippled? Mu Chen frowned and asked, You have no way to treat him? Old Mo shook his head. His injuries were caused by a golden core cultivator and his internal organs are injured. How can ordinary medicine treat him? Unless. His voice paused and he didn't say anything else, only sighing softly. Unless what? You, asked. Old Mo glanced at you, and then at Hao, Unless there's a miracle pill, otherwise, even if he recovers, he will have a chronic illness and become a cripple. Hao's eyes flickered. Originally, he thought that if the medicinal pills he got from Hui Chun Hall would improve his condition after taking them, then he would use Hui Chun Hall's medicinal pills. After all, he didn't have many medicinal pills left for internal injuries from his mother. If he still couldn't find a way to go back, and if something happened to Mu Chen and Mu Yu, he wouldn't know what to do if he didn't have the medicinal pills with him just in case. However, after hearing the doctor's words, he knew that if he wanted to save 17, he could only use his mother's medicinal pills. Doctor, we need to recuperate here for a few days. Do you have a place for us to recuperate? Hao asked directly. Hearing this, Elder Hiroshi was startled. He thought for a moment and nodded. There is, but the place is not big. It's just a small courtyard at the back. But. He looked at the silver wolf at the side with some worry. Don't worry, it won't hurt anyone. Hao knew what he was worried about and said, as long as no one has bad intentions towards us, it won't hurt anyone. So I don't have to worry that it will cause trouble here. Chapter 45-58. Elder Hiroshi ordered people to carry 17 to a room in the small courtyard at the back and wrote a prescription for someone to brew the medicine. At the same time, he ordered people to disperse the curious crowd in front of the medical center. However, he didn't expect that after settling the children and the others, he heard that the city lord had come to visit, as well as the various family heads and people in power in the city, were all heading to the medical center. Old master, the city lord is here. He's sitting outside. The patriarchs and patriarchs of the various clans in the city are also here. An apprentice alchemist from the medical hall quickly reported with a nervous expression. Beside him, a middle-aged man heard and looked at old Master Mo, saying, "Father, why don't I go out and take a look?" "I'll go with you." Old Master Mo sighed softly and said, "They probably want to see those children." The two of them walked out. When they arrived at the outer room, they saw that it was crowded with people standing and sitting. Originally, because of the sudden arrival of those children and the frightening silver wolf, the medical center had a resting sign outside. However, it still couldn't stop the leaders of the various forces in the city from coming to visit. Old Master Mo, the city lord, smiled and went forward to greet him. "City lord." After old Master Mo bowed, he cupped his hands and bowed to the others. "You're all here too. You really bring light to my small medical center." "Hee, old Master Mo, what are you saying?" One of the old men smiled and said, "We heard that a few amazing people came to the city and even brought a rare silver wolf. Naturally, we wanted to come and see what was going on." "Old Master Son, I'm afraid this won't do." Old Master Mo sighed softly and said, "Those people are now staying in our backyard to recuperate. They've already told us that they don't want to be disturbed." Hearing this, everyone looked at each other. One of them asked again, "I wonder, in old Master Mo's opinion, what rank of spirit beast is that silver wolf? Did they say which family they are from? Or which sect they are from? Why are they here?" "Hee, this is a medical center. We're only responsible for treating illnesses and injuries. How can we ask about other things? I really don't know the answer to your question." Old Master Mo waved his hand and said, "Since it's in your backyard, it shouldn't be a problem for us to take a look, right?" Another person said tentatively, "It's not that I want to stop you, but I'm worried about you." As Elder Mo spoke, he looked at them and said, "That silver wolf is guarding the courtyard. One of the young masters has already said that if we don't provoke them, the silver wolf will not harm anyone. But if we provoke them, it's hard to say." Hearing those words, some of the people who originally wanted to go and check it out immediately hesitated. As the city lord and the host of this place, I would like to invite them to stay in the city lord's mansion to recuperate. The city lord smiled and looked at old Master Mo. "Old Master Mo, can I trouble you to send someone to pass on a message? Why don't we ask for their opinion?" Old Master Mo paused for a moment, then said, "All right. Please wait for a while, city lord. I'll ask them myself." With that, he let his son entertain the people and went to the backyard himself. In the backyard, when Hauer heard old Master Mo's words, he looked at him and asked, "Are we causing trouble for you by recuperating here?" "Hee, it's no use. It's just that everyone is very curious about the young masters and the others, so." Chapter 45-59. When the city lord and the others who were sitting outside saw a young man in a small black robe walk out, surprise flashed across their eyes. This was because this young man was emitting the strength of a golden core stage cultivation. Perhaps this strength was not very shocking. After all, the people present were all leaders of various forces, so they naturally had the strength of a golden core realm cultivator. However, when this strength and grade appeared on a child around the age of 10, it was naturally shocking. This was because it was somewhat impossible. No matter how talented a person was, it was impossible for a 10-year-old to reach the power of a golden core cultivator. However, this child in front of them really had the power of a golden core cultivator. This made them take him seriously and shocked him. Looking at this young boy again, his every move exuded a noble aura that could not be concealed. Obviously, his background was extremely noble. Looking at his face again, it was very outstanding. However, although he was young, the aura on his body was somewhat cold. When they looked to the side and saw the snow-white silver wolf, almost everyone sucked in a breath of cold air and stood up abruptly. This is a divine beast. No, it's a divine beast. The city lord said in a trembling voice. When he saw the silver wolf glance at him, his legs trembled slightly. Hauer glanced at them. There was no expression on his cold little face. Even though he was only around 10 years old, in front of these people in power, he did not show the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he was indifferent and calm, looking at them with the gaze of a superior. "What are you looking for me for?" Hao asked coldly. His gaze fell on them. At this moment, the city lord regained his senses and hurriedly lowered his posture. He cupped his hands and said, "I am the city lord of this city. I would like to invite young master and the rest to the city lord's residence to recuperate as a host. What do you think, young master?" Hao paused for a moment and said, "My guard is injured and does not want to move at the moment. After a few days, when his injuries have recovered, we will go to the city lord's residence to stay for a few days." Originally, he did not plan to do so. However, when he came out, the silver wolf told him that since they were already high profile here, there was no need to go to that sect. He believed that as the news spread, that sect would definitely send people over. At that time, he would just go with them. The city lord originally didn't have much hope, but he didn't want to hear him say that. He was instantly overjoyed and hurriedly said, "Good, good, good. Then when I go back, I'll have people prepare the small courtyard and wait for the young masters to come." As he spoke, he said to Elder Mo who was at the side, "Elder Mo, use the best medicine for the young master's injuries. You must let him recover as soon as possible. Don't worry, city lord. This old man understands." He nodded. When the others saw this, they didn't say anything else. They only followed the young man and the silver wolf inside. Then, they looked at the city lord and said, "City lord, this person is obviously not an ordinary person. I wonder where he came from. That's a sacred beast. Its strength is above that of a sacred beast. It's definitely not something that can appear in a place like ours. I guess these people are from the upper realm." An old man said as he stroked his beard thoughtfully. Chapter 45-60. Let's go back first. Don't disturb them here. Elder Mo's place is also a place for business. It's not appropriate for us to stay here. The city lord looked at them and said, "Everyone, follow me to the city lord's mansion for a cup of tea." Hearing this, everyone looked at each other and followed him to the city lord's mansion. After they left, the medical center gradually quieted down. Elder Mo took a look and sighed softly. He told his son to keep an eye on things and went to the back. In the small courtyard at the back, this was originally the place where the old man researched medicine in his free time. Now that they were allowed in, he had instructed the people in the Mo family's medical hall not to disturb them here. Therefore, it was very quiet here. At this time, the silver wolf was guarding outside while the 3 children were inside the room. Looking at 17 lying on the bed, Hao took out a pill and stuffed it into his mouth. After he swallowed it, he said to Mu Chen and Mu Yu, "Mother gave 17 these pills to treat his internal injuries. After giving him one, there are only 2 left." Hearing this, the 2 children finally understood why their big brother didn't directly give 17 the pills their mother refined. It turned out that they were almost used up. "Big brother, we will be careful. We won't get hurt." Mu Yu promised seriously, not wanting her brother to worry. "Yes, we won't let ourselves get hurt. Big brother, don't worry. Perhaps we'll be able to go back and see father and mother soon. In the future, we'll just ask mother to give us some pills to protect ourselves," Mu Chen added. Hao nodded and said to them, "When 17's injuries are better, we will stay in the city lord's mansion for a few days. We don't have to travel all the way. I believe that the people from the sect will also hear the news. When they send people over, we will follow them." He told the 2 children some things to take note of and let them rest first. Due to their high-profile entrance into the city, a commotion was stirred up in the city. Just as Silver Wolf and Hao had expected, even the floating Fate Celestial sect had heard the news. The sect leader of the Floating Fate Celestial sect had brought along 2 elders and 2 peak masters. 3 days later, in the clinic, Elder Mo was taking 17's pulse. When he felt his pulse, he couldn't help but feel surprised. His eyes moved slightly as he carefully checked 17's pulse again. Finally, he looked at Hao with a complicated expression. Did young master give him some kind of pill? Elder Mo asked. Hao glanced at him and replied, yes, I gave him a medicinal pill to treat internal injuries. How is his injury now? The Dan you fed him must be extremely valuable. Even such a serious injury has healed 60 to 70% in 3 days. How unbelievable. He sighed softly, his voice was full of shock. He glanced at them and said, he has already taken that miraculous pill. Even if he doesn't drink the medicine this old man prescribed, he will recover in a few days. Now, he can get out of bed and walk around without any problems. 3 days, it had only been 3 days. He hadn't come to see him for 3 days, but his injuries had almost recovered. If he hadn't personally treated this person, he wouldn't have believed that he could recover so quickly. Chapter 45-61. Since it's like this, let's go to the City Lord Mansion today. Hao said. He looked at him and said, sorry to disturb you for these few days. As he spoke, he took out some gold coins. This is the medical fee and the cost of recuperating here for these few days. Seeing this, old Mo didn't decline and took the gold coins. He said, then I'll send someone to the City Lord Mansion to ask them to send a carriage over. Okay, sorry to trouble you. Hao replied. After watching him leave, he looked at 17 and said, let's stay in the City Lord Mansion for a few days and recuperate while we're at it. Young master, aren't we in a hurry? 17 has already wasted a lot of time. If we... It's fine. Hao interrupted him and said, just do as I say. Now, you don't have to think about anything else. Recuperate first. Yes. 17 replied and thanked again. Many thanks to the 3 masters for giving 17 such precious pills. 17, it's good that you're fine. You still have to follow us. Don't die too easily. Yu said with a smile. She clapped her hands and said, how about this? Big brother, let's teach 17 how to escape. This way, even if he can't defeat others, he can still escape. Hearing this, 17 hurriedly shook his head. No, I'm here to protect the 3 masters. If there's danger, how can I escape alone? I won't learn that. From the moment he acknowledged them as his masters, his life was theirs. How could he learn how to escape when there's danger? That was too wrong. Hao looked at him and said, we'll talk about other things later. Recuperate first. After the city lord received the news from the Mo clan, he personally led people and a carriage to the medical center to receive them. He led them to a courtyard prepared in the city lord mansion to rest. Because of the city lord's earlier instructions, at this time, even if the people in the city lord mansion were curious, they didn't dare to disturb them. After staying in the city lord mansion for 2 days, the city lord came to the courtyard with the excuse of sending medicinal herbs. He said with a smile, young master, you've been here for 2 days, but we still don't know how to address you. Hao said, our surname is Shenyuan. Shenyuan. Shenyuan is an ancient surname, and you can't find a single family with this surname on the floating Fate Immortal Island. I wonder if young master Shenyuan is from the upper realm? He asked cautiously. That's right. Hao nodded. We are indeed from the upper realm. Even though he had already guessed it, when he heard it from Xuanyuan's mouth, he still couldn't help but feel excited. Thus, he bent over and put on a flattering smile on his face, and carefully said, young master Shenyuan, as you can see, the people here rarely have the chance to come in contact with or know about the upper realm. I wonder if you can tell me a little about it. What do you want to know? How? Asked. The city lord was overjoyed and immediately asked, are all the powerhouses in the upper realm above the golden elixir stage? Were spirit beasts everywhere? Were there as many experts as there were clouds? How can people like us go to the upper realm? Chapter 45-62. Yes, but they only bring some children up there. They won't let people like us go to the upper bound. The city lord said and bowed respectfully to him. Young Master Shenyuan, please give me some pointers on how to go to the upper bound. Those who are strong can break through the void and travel. Otherwise, there are transmission scrolls. Another way is for you to cultivate to the upper bound and receive you, but how? Paused. He looked at Yi Futian and said, with your strength, you can be the lord of a city here. But once you go up, if you offend a strong cultivator, you'll be killed with a flick of a finger. Moreover, you're too weak to be a guard, let alone a city lord. Even those who are weaker than you are from some clans and have people backing them. So, I don't recommend you go to the upper world. Hearing this, the city lord was startled. For a moment, he was silent and did not speak. After being a city lord for so long and having lived for so long, he naturally knew that everything was not so easy. But in the end, there was still some unwillingness in his heart. How? Did not continue this topic. Instead, he said, we will wait here for the people from the sect to come. If they come, bring them to see us. Young master, you are waiting for the people from the sect. The city lord was startled. Yes. He nodded and did not say more. Seeing this, the city lord said, okay, I understand. If they come, I will bring them to see young master. With that, he bowed and left first. Another 10 days passed. On this day, after Mu Chen and Mu Yu finished practicing in the courtyard, they sat in the courtyard. The two pursed their lips and did not speak. They only clutched their beating hearts in their chest, thinking about something. These days, their symptoms did not change, but they gradually got used to it and endured it. But when they thought that this could be related to their parents, they were still worried. Brother, do you think something will happen to father and mother? Yu could not help but ask softly. I don't think so. Big brother said that they are very strong people, Mu Chen said. When the silver wolf who was lying in the courtyard heard their words, it stood up and stretched. It walked to the two of them and said, they will be fine. Your parents are very powerful people. No one can hurt them. Besides, even if something happens, it won't last for so long. As he spoke, the silver wolf glanced at the two of them and said, because of your blood relationship, you still haven't been able to break through the blood curse. But don't worry too much. Once you see your parents, they will think of a way to help you break the blood curse. My big brother said that we also have very powerful contract beasts inside our body. Yu said, then looking at Silver Wolf, she asked, are they more powerful than you? Hearing this, the Silver Wolf snorted, not as powerful as me. I'm the king of wolves, the Silver Wolf. Whether it's in terms of combat power or speed, I'm not inferior to the ancient mythical beasts. At this point, its voice paused, and it secretly curled its lips. The ancient divine beast, it had lost because of this title. But in terms of combat power, it definitely didn't think that it was inferior to the Qilin and the nine-tailed fox. Chapter 45-63. Who are you? The guard saw that they had an extraordinary aura and did not dare to be rude. The person who knocked on the door took out his waist token and handed it over. The guard looked at it and hurriedly bowed before opening the door to let them in. At the same time, he whispered a few words to the other guard beside him, telling him to go in and report. The city lord was walking to the front yard, thinking, young Master Xianyuan said that the people from the sect would come. However, I haven't seen them for so many days. Will they really come? Just as he was thinking, the housekeeper hurried in and asked, "What's wrong? Don't be so flustered." "Master, master, the immortal sect, the people from the immortal sect are here," the housekeeper quickly said and ran in, panting. Hearing this, the city lord was shocked. He lifted his robe and walked forward, saying, "Get someone to prepare tea first. I will personally invite them in." On the way, he met a few people. When he saw them, his heart skipped a beat. He quickly cupped his hands and bowed. "I didn't expect the sect master to come in person. Sorry for the lack of manners. Please come in." "Ha ha ha, City Lord Gong, I trust you have been well since we last met." The old man smiled and returned the greeting. He then walked in with the city lord. When they sat down in the hall, the sect master introduced them, saying, "These two are the second elder and the third elder. These two are the peak masters of our sect. We rushed over after hearing the news. We also want to ask the city lord if the rumors outside are true." "Of course it is true," the city lord said. "Now, those young masters are living in the city lord's mansion. They also have a super divine beast Silver Wolf with them." "Oh. It's true. It seems that they must be from the upper realm," the sect master said with surprise in his eyes. He then asked, "Does the city lord know how they got here? Which part of the upper realm did they come from?" "I don't know. How about this? I will ask someone to invite those young masters over and let them talk," the city lord said, and was about to ask the housekeeper to invite them over. The sect master thought for a moment and looked at the two elders sitting below him. He said, "Let's go see them. I'll have to trouble the city lord to introduce us." Seeing this, the city lord did not say anything. He also stood up and said, "All right, everyone, this way please." Hao was guiding Mu Chen and Mu Yu in their cultivation in the courtyard. 17 was learning from him, and the silver wolf was watching from the side. Perhaps it sensed that someone was coming, so it turned its head to look outside the courtyard, and 2 breaths came out of its nose. When Hao and the others saw this, they stopped and looked outside the courtyard. Not long after, the city lord brought a few people to the courtyard and said, "Young Master Shenyuan, the sect leader, 2 elders, and 2 peak leaders are here. Please come in." 17 stepped forward to welcome them. When the few people from the sect entered the small courtyard, their gazes naturally landed on the silver wolf lying on the side. With one look, they were secretly shocked. He had heard rumors that it was a sacred beast, but he didn't expect it to be true. That silver wolf just lay there, its aura restrained, but it was enough to make people tremble in fear, not daring to be the slightest bit presumptuous. Chapter 45-64. Hao glanced at them, then looked at the city lord and said, "City lord, I want to talk to them." Hearing this, the city lord said, "Okay, you guys talk. I'll get someone to bring you some tea." With that, he left first. "Little lord, your surname is Shenyuan." After introducing himself and the people around him, the sect leader looked at the young boy in front of him and asked. He looked at him, then at the twins beside him, and was surprised. 3 such young children, but there was only 1 weak guard by their side. However, that silver wolf was already comparable to many strong cultivators. What kind of family would allow such young children to come to the lower realm? "That's right," Hao replied and said directly, "We're from the upper realm." Hearing this, their expressions changed slightly. They had already guessed it, so they were not very surprised when they heard him say so. However, from the looks of it, he knew very well that they would come. "Since you're from the upper realm, why are you here? Also, what do you want to talk to us about, little lord?" the sect leader asked. "I heard that your sect can contact the upper realm and send people up. I want to ask for your help to send us to the upper realm," Hao said. He looked at the sect leader and said, "After this matter is done, there will be great rewards." The sect leader and the others looked at each other, and one of the elders asked doubtfully, since you're from the upper realm and can come here, you must have a way to go back. Why do you need our help? Hao paused for a moment before saying, we came here by accident and lost contact with our families, so we can't go back by ourselves. If that's the case, which upper realm family are you from? Perhaps we can ask someone to inform you on your behalf. As the sect leader spoke, he looked at them and smiled bitterly. To tell you the truth, the immortal emissaries from the upper realm come here to pick people to go to the upper realm. It's up to them to decide how many and who to bring. Even if I'm the sect leader, I can't say anything. Hearing this, Hao frowned and was silent for a moment. If that was the case, it would be a little troublesome. In that case, we'll go with you to the sect and wait. When the immortal emissary comes, we'll tell him ourselves. As the silver wolf spoke, he stood up and stretched. He walked towards them step by step. Seeing that they were slightly leaning back nervously, he looked down at them and said, my little master's parents are extremely noble. Since you have helped them this time, you will naturally repay them in the future. Hearing this, the faction leader and the others looked at each other as if they were thinking about something. Finally, they said, all right then. Follow us back to the sect. No matter what, there was nothing wrong with forming good karma. Moreover, this young boy in front of him was already at the peak of the Jindan stage at the age of 10. It was conceivable that his parents must be even more powerful. As a result, they did not stay here for long. After discussing, they prepared to bring Hao and the others back to the sect. However, to their surprise, just as they were packing up and preparing to leave, they saw the city lord enter with an ugly expression. He looked at Hao and the others with a grave expression. Chapter 45-65. The city lord looked at him as if he was afraid that he didn't know what kind of power it was. He said, I know this rejuvenation hall. It's a hall that specializes in medicinal herbs and pills. They come from the Ruan family of Lingnan and are very powerful. Are they from the Ruan family of Lingnan? The sect master frowned slightly and looked at Hao and the others. He asked, do you have a grudge with them? Some time ago, we killed the owner of Rejuvenation Hall and some of their people, Hao said indifferently. His voice didn't fluctuate. I didn't expect that they would dare to come. The silver wolf snorted and said, I'll go out and tidy up. As he spoke, he walked out. An elder at the side saw that no matter if it was the 3 children or the guard called 17, they all had indifferent expressions. There was no worry or panic. He couldn't help but ask, why do you have a grudge with them? Yu raised her small face and said with a smile, they are bad people. They wanted to catch us, so Big Brother killed them all. Hearing this, they understood. So it was like that. Hundreds of people fought. Swords and sabers have no eyes. You all should hide inside first. We'll go out and take a look. As the sect master spoke, he led the people behind him and walked out. However, as soon as they left, Hao and the others also followed them out. At this time, there was a black mass outside the city lord's mansion. Hundreds of cultivators surrounded the city lord's mansion, and behind them were some people in the city who came to watch the show. So at a glance, there really weren't an ordinary number of heads. Hand over the person who killed my son. A malicious voice filled with killing intent mixed with the aura of spiritual power spread in the air. Hand him over. Hand him over. Those cultivators held swords and sabers in their hands and pointed at the sky. Their voices were so loud that it hurt people's eardrums. Does City Lord Gong want to go against my Ruan family of Lingnan? The old man who spoke saw that the gate of the city lord's mansion was tightly shut and there was no movement at all. He couldn't help but be angry. Ruan family of Lingnan. Suddenly, a deep and dignified voice with a bloodthirsty aura was heard. At that moment, everyone only saw a light flash in front of them. They looked over and saw a majestic silver wolf standing on the wall of the city lord's mansion, looking down at them from above. That bloodthirsty voice came from its mouth. Do you want to die without an intact corpse? Or do you want to exterminate your family? Or obediently turn around and leave now? Hiss. Divine beast. How is that a divine beast? This is a divine beast. I didn't expect that the rumors were true. Seeing that, some's families as mansion people s's family t's. They were of the sect of people of the city lords. T of them of att of people of them. The old man in the lead, the old master of the Ruan family, held a black walking stick in his hand. When he looked at that silver wolf, his eyes flashed as if he had found a prey. As early as 10 days ago, he received news that his third son had died. Moreover, his death was extremely tragic. It was said that he was torn apart by a divine beast. Chapter 45-66. 3 children, a weak guard, but a divine beast, even a sacred beast, followed by a contract beast. After much consideration, he decided to bring people here. If he could capture those children, he would be able to deal with the sacred beast. If he could make a contract with it, then, thinking of this, he was excited, and the blood in his body rose and fell. This was an opportunity for the Ruan family of Lingnan. Wealth came from danger. Even if there were risks and some people would be sacrificed, what if it succeeded? The gate of the city lord's residence opened at this moment, and a few people from the sect walked out. The leader looked at the old master of the Ruan family, and his eyes flashed. Long time no see, Elder Ruan. Oh, I didn't expect you to be here too. He lifted his eyelids and glanced at the leader. If you don't want to be enemies with the Ruan family of Lingnan, you'd better disperse. As he spoke, his gaze swept past the few people beside the leader, the city lord who walked out from behind, and Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu who followed behind him. When he saw the 3 of them, his eyes flashed. He knew that instead of dealing with the wolf, it was better to think of a way to capture the 3 children first. Then, would the silver wolf be able to fight with them? He made arrangements and gave a look to the few people who were scattered around, telling them to act according to the situation. Elder Ruan, they are the honored guests of the sect. I hope you can stop now and leave with the people of the Ruan family. Otherwise, if we fight, I'm afraid the losses will outweigh the gains, the leader said. He didn't want to see the scene of the 2 sides fighting, because that would definitely be a bloody scene. How can I just let them off after killing people of the Ruan family? He said with a cold face, and the walking stick in his hand slammed heavily on the ground. His action seemed to be a signal that had been given a long time ago. At the same time, a few people who were scattered among the 100 cultivators suddenly rushed toward the 3 children. When the leader and the others in front saw this, they naturally couldn't let the 3 children be captured. When they were about to appear, Hao shouted from behind, Silver Wolf. As soon as his voice fell, the silver wolf that was standing on top of the wall a moment ago swept past like a ray of cold light, directly pouncing down and biting off the necks of the few people who rushed forward. Blood flowed everywhere, and the smell of blood spread in the air. This sudden scene caused the sect leader and the others to stiffen. The silver wolf's speed was too fast. It was so fast that they could only see the cold light flashing by. They didn't even have time to react. Ah! Hiss! Shrill screams pierced through the clouds and reverberated in everyone's ears. The few cultivators who rushed forward were all gold core cultivators, but they died under the silver wolf's feet just like that. Those people's necks were all bitten off. Those who couldn't break their necks in time were directly stepped on by the silver wolf's claws. The silver wolf raised its claws again, and blood spurted out. Their breaths were instantly cut off. Hao walked out from behind and stood beside the silver wolf. He stared coldly at the old master of the Ruan clan. Do you want to die? Or do you want to live? You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.